Good evening. I would like to call a regular council meeting for Monday, May 10th to order at 6 p.m. Hello to those who are watching the live webcast this evening or watching the meeting at a later time. I'm Mayor McNeil Smith, and joining me in the council chamber are colleagues Councillor Garnett and Councillor Rintoul, and our four colleagues, council colleagues, are joining us via Zoom. Sorry. And welcome to our four council colleagues who you can see on your Zoom screen, Councillor Duncan, Councillor Fallett, Councillor O'Keefe, and Councillor Wainwright. Staff attending the meeting this evening in the council chamber, we have our CAO, Mr. Humble, our CFO, Mr. Hissick, our corporate officer, Ms. Nelson, and our IT manager, Mr. Maxwell. Joining us via Zoom as questions come up or introductions to reports, we have Ms. Verhagen, our Senior Manager of Current Planning, Corey Newcomb, our Senior Manager of Long Range Planning, Ms. Clary, our Director of Engineering and Works, and our Fire and Rescue Chief, Mr. Mickelson. Good evening to all, and I would like to begin with a territorial acknowledgement, respectfully acknowledging we are holding this evening's meeting in the territory of the Wasanich Nations. Before looking for a motion to approve the agenda, I have three amendments. We did have a submission from a councillor with regards to alternate wording of our motions that will happen under the VAA referral under item 13A, and that is a part of the public record now. We have additional correspondence regarding the VAA referral. So we did have, members of the public who have looked at our agenda will see that we had a significant number of pieces of correspondence from the public included in the agenda package, but we have received additional correspondence from Thursday afternoon until today, and Council has received all of that correspondence, which is now part of tonight's agenda. And lastly, we have a piece of correspondence from Mr. Crane, not related to the VAA, but related to another item, which will go under item 15.6, which is correspondence for information. With those amendments, I would look for a motion to approve.
Move approval of the agenda as amended.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. We'll now move to our public participation, and I think as members of the public are aware, we have two opportunities to participate in public participation. Individuals can provide submissions which will be read out, and we do have three submissions, and I'll turn to Mr. Humble in a moment. And we do have four speakers this evening, and I will introduce those after we've had the written submissions read aloud. Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The first submission is from Mr. Paul Thiessen, and it reads as follows. Hello, the proposed distribution centre provides a wonderful opportunity for Sydney, and I would encourage the community to embrace it. Rarely does Sydney have the type of opportunity for immediate job creation. These are good, clean jobs providing a clear economic benefit. Excuse me. The distribution operation is clean and eco-friendly and is ideal for the airport. The Airport Authority is a proven honourable partner with Sydney. Any traffic concerns can easily be remedied with technology. This facility suits the neighbourhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beeson.
The second piece of correspondence is from Mr. Don Enright, and it reads as follows. To Mayor and Council, I am a resident of North Saanich, where we share the local air with our Sydney neighbours. Please find below a link to a May 8, 2021 article from the Los Angeles Times entitled, As Diesel Death Zones Spread, Pollution Regulators Place the New Rules on Warehouse Industry. It will tell you much of what you need to know about the less salubrious contributions the new YYJ warehouse will make to our North Peninsula environment. Given the fact that our neighbourhood is already awash in emissions from ferry and airport road traffic, not to mention the effects of the ferries and the airplanes themselves, the additional exhaust from scores of daily trucks can only make our breathing more difficult and more dangerous, even as we collectively fight COVID, a widely fatal respiratory disease. I find it truly extraordinary, though, after the Gateway debacle, sadly not surprising, that the entirely foreseeable effects of the airport's proposed project on the lives of its neighbours are not part of the VAA's calculus. I urge you to take a look at, and he refers to the link on the on the Los Angeles Times piece. Many thanks for your attention, Don Enright.
Thank you for your input, Mr. Enright.
Thirdly, I have correspondence from Tammy Lee, and it reads as follows. My name is Tammy Lee. I've lived in Sydney for 12 years. I am strongly against this massive warehouse development as I read more about how much impact it creates to our community. I can't find any positive article about it. It destroys our community, our public health, environment, economy, safety, and our dignity. This is not what we want for our children. Creating more low-income jobs isn't a solution to boost our economy. We need more jobs that can support a better lifestyle for residents, which in turn affects local spending, the housing market, and the tax base. We need a better plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lee, for your input. And those are the 3 written submissions. I will now ask Mr. Jelena if he can connect, please. And so we do have 4 speakers tonight. I would ask each of the speakers to speak for a maximum of 4 minutes, and we will let you know when that time arrives. And you, Mr. Jelena, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mayor. My name is Denny Jelena, 2545 Oakville Avenue. Like many other Sydney residents, was surprised to see the removal of the large Monterey cypress tree at 9717 2nd Street, which was protected under the town's tree preservation bylaw. The bylaw states that protected trees can be removed if they have defects which increase the likelihood that a tree will fall, resulting in the risk of personal injury or property damage. The owner of the property submitted 2 reports from arborists in support of our application to remove the tree based on safety considerations. Concerns were also raised by some councillors during the discussion about liability issues and safety. At the same time, the staff report noted that while this species of tree does have a history of limb failure, the tree was healthy and not an imminent hazard. They recommended that 20% of the full area of the tree be removed to address concerns about falling branches and that the application be denied. I also believe the application should have been denied and steps taken to mitigate the risk recommended by staff. 4 councillors chose to ignore the advice of staff, including its own arborist, and chose to support the opinion of the independent arborists. Why does the town have its own arborist, and why is it hiring a second arborist if their expert opinions are to be ignored? Had the tree been preserved and an application development been submitted, staff could have proposed options to retain the tree, perhaps by increasing the building height. In any event, it's too late now. A 2018 report prepared for the town by a Barefoot Planning focused heavily on tree canopy restoration. Sydney's tree canopy was measured at 14%. It's probably lower now. One of the lowest in the CRD. Oak Bays, for example, is 33%. Every effort should be taken to preserve our tree canopy. The removal of protected trees should be a measure of last resort. I also believe that communication with the public on this issue should be better handled, and the council should consider directing staff to develop a communication strategy. The strategy could include a fact sheet on the town's tree preservation bylaw, especially as it affects trees on private property. So, for example, the species and size of trees to be protected, prohibitions against removing and pruning. Equally important, it could also include a requirement to post public notices of requests to remove or trim protected trees. I understand this is the practice in other municipalities in the CRD. Council will well be faced with similar issues in the future, and a communication strategy would be an effective tool in responding to questions and concerns from the public. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Jelena. We appreciate you coming before council this evening and your comments. I'll turn to our next speaker and ask if Mr. Duck is connected, please. Good evening, Mr. Duck.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Hello, I'm Steve Duck of 9805 2nd Street, Sydney. Tonight, I'm speaking as the President of the Sydney Community Association on behalf of our members and residents of Sydney. The Sydney Community Association recognizes the concept of the distribution center as permissible under the current uses for this building zone. The Sydney Community Association challenges the process being conducted by the Victoria Airport Authority and the town of Sydney. According to the Accord and the MOU identified by the town regulating this land, and I quote from that Accord, Gallaran Road, this area is directly adjacent to a residential area, and any development proposal will be strictly reviewed by the Victoria Airport Authority. Buildings will require extensive design considerations and will be scaled and detailed with respect to the residents it faces. An extensive landscaping plan is also a requirement for any development in this area, unquote. Three questions have emerged from our review of this proposal. What meaningful consultation with the Galaran neighborhood was conducted by the BAA and the town of Sydney relative to this development? Does the accord and the memorandum of understanding create binding and unenforceable obligations for either the town or the BAA? And finally, under what legislative authority did the town of Sydney have the authority to give up this authority? The Sydney Community Association, on behalf of its members and the residents of Sydney, respectfully requests the BAA and the town of Sydney provide responses to these questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Duck. We appreciate you coming before council this evening. I'll turn to my next speaker. Mr. Irwin, are you connected?
Oh, yes, I am.
Good evening, Mr. Irwin. We'd ask that you have the virtual floor for 4 minutes, and please proceed.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Geoff Irwin. I'm a resident on the west side of Sydney on Jan Place. This last week has been very eye-opening for myself and my family. I have engaged in conversation with so many people I've stopped trying to keep count. I have talked with many residents of Sydney and the greater community about their significant concerns regarding the development being proposed at 9989 McDonald Park Road. I am personally extremely disappointed in and angered with the way this proposed development has been rolled out by the Victoria Airport Authority. The lack of engagement by the VAA has been disgraceful. The community that will be most affected by this proposed development has been completely left in the dark. This unwillingness to seek input from the greater community on the impacts of this development shows very clearly where the VAA, York Realty, and the unnamed tenant place value on the proper use of land, community development, and accountability. Truly an absolute failure in process and planning. The building being proposed for this parcel of land should not be going there. It's plain and simple. The fact that the absurd relaxations and ignorance to height, multiple setbacks, and lot coverage has been accepted by the VAA at this point is astounding. If the requirements of this development were suitable for this land, these types of relaxations would not be required. This isn't called innovation, and this isn't called creativity. This is lack of planning and improper use of land. The VAA states in their own development guidelines, and I echo the comment that Mr. Duck just made, the following, I quote, this area is adjacent to a residential area, and any development proposal will be strictly reviewed by the VAA. Buildings will require extensive design consideration and will be scaled and detailed with respect to adjacent residences. Also, in the VAA's development guidelines regarding developments adjacent to lands zoned for residential use is the following statement, quote, building design, roof lines, and exterior finishes should be sympathetic with the residentially zoned land, unquote. In addition, Sydney's official community plan states that one of its objectives is to, quote, ensure that industrial activity does not adversely affect the residential community located east of Galaran Road and south of Henry Avenue West, unquote. Let me ask the Victoria Airport Authority this. How has any of this been effectively addressed or even remotely considered? Nothing has been scaled in a sympathetic way. This proposal is all about mass. The number of adverse effects this development poses is lengthy. Social, traffic, pollution, noise, safety, security, form and character, the list is long. This development has the potential to set many negative precedences in our community with regards to how land use policy is effectively managed, implemented, and interpreted, how the VAA conducts business and attracts investment, and the form and character of future development in the area. The greater community and myself expect much more from the VAA. This proposed development is an absolute disaster waiting to happen. The VAA's alienation of neighboring residents and the community at large has eroded their credibility and trust. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Irwin. We appreciate you coming before council this evening. I'll now turn to my last speaker. Is Mr. Chalevin connected, please? Okay, we do not have our fourth speaker connected. There has been an attempt made, but seeing that he's not connected now, I will close public participation. And we don't have any public hearings this evening. We'll next move to our presentation. And I would ask if Mr. Dickson is connected, and I would like to introduce his presentation. Good evening, Mr. Dickson.
Yes, good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. I know there's certainly a variety of views on this particular development, and I'll certainly get to that in a moment. I thought if I could just take a moment and talk a bit about the airport itself. We are not the landowner, as I think everyone is aware. We have a lease with the federal government, and we actively manage the airport facility, including the airport lands, and we have a lease in place till 2077. The zoning that we have is established by the federal government. We can apply for zoning or land use changes, but there's a process, a very strict process to follow. And the reason that the federal government controls the land use is really so a transportation hub can fulfill its objectives. For example, if we want to develop our runway system or expand our parking facilities, we don't necessarily recognize the ALR. And it's really for that reason. But in this case, our zoning is completely aligned with the town of Sydney. So that said, it certainly doesn't give you the license to be a poor community neighbor. And that's really one of the drivers for why we're one of the few airports in the country that actually has a development accord with the town of Sydney. We also have a development accord with the District of North Saanich, and we've had those accords in place since the year 2000. And the accord is really a structure such that the Sydney planners and the town can evaluate the submissions and present recommendations to council for the VA to follow. And we intend to follow the recommendations coming out of council here. I mean, that's essentially why we have this process. So in terms of community goodwill, and I'll come back to the process itself, but I just think it's important that we understand sort of how the airports value its role in the community. So we provide the baseball lands, the softball fields, effectively free of charge to the municipalities, which is, I imagine many of your children have grown up playing on that facility. We provided the playground, Jubilee Park, to District of North Saanich. Again, I think it's a $3 a year lease. We're designing right now a pollinator garden at the airport. We've spent millions of dollars restoring habitat, frankly, from creeks that were neglected and effectively dead to fish-bearing streams today. We built a 9.3 kilometer walking and bike trail around the airport at a cost, again, of millions of dollars for the community. We built the Lost Airmen of the Empire to recognize the military history for those that lost their lives serving during the war at the Pat Bay Airport. We plan to be a carbon neutral airport, one of the only ones in Canada by 2030. And we're very proud of our environmental efforts. If you look at the landscaping alone on our parking lots, they're probably the nicest you'll find in the country, anywhere. In terms of the overall economic impact, this airport facility that you're neighboring, that we're all part of, is close to $1 billion a year economic generator. And so the impact on the economy, as you can imagine, is enormous. But I will also say, I wouldn't even hazard to guess what the negative impact has been to the economy through COVID. If we look at our business being at 10% of what it was in 2019, you can only extrapolate the numbers and think that's hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of economic activity lost. We are a key transportation center, and so when you think about how you want to evolve the airport, you need to think about multimodal forms of transportation. We've also facilitated on the west side of Sydney, the largest manufacturing site on Vancouver Island. In terms of overall developments, this is our 5th development that we have put forward. Right now, we have under construction with Titan Boats, Western Canada Marine Spill Response, Blue Heron Aviation Park, and World Fuels at the airport. And they're all following the same process. And I might add also, one of the other areas that we're governed by is the Environmental Impact Assessment Act, of which we have a duty to consult with First Nations, and we provided background on all those projects to Sakem First Nations, July 20th of last year, and again for this particular development on March 9th. We're still learning probably how to improve communications and how WSONIC evolves, how we can get better at working with the broader WSONIC First Nation. In terms of the process itself for submissions, we evaluate the submissions. The first thing that has to happen is NAV Canada. The control towers have to look to see how is it compatible at all with an airfield, because first and foremost, we're moving airplanes safely in and out of the airport. Then once we have made a decision that we're going to go forward and provide this to the town of Sydney for input as per the development accord, we send it to the municipality for a 40-day review. And then we receive comments of which we would take under consideration, under very careful consideration, and implement. We then issue the development permit, building and occupancy permits. So why this particular project? So we took a deep breath when this came in and said, well, why should we do this? The site itself, I know when I came to the airport, everyone was asking me to develop that particular site. It's a brownfield. It's not particularly attractive. Sydney Council had approved a dry dock facility there in 2006. It was a 30-meter high, just for your memories, a 30-meter high structure, which is 8 meters higher than this particular structure. But it never, fortunately, a development permit was never issued by the DAA. But one thing that was very clear that came out of that particular review by the town of Sydney was go and consult very closely with the Galarin residents and the neighbors, of which my understanding is the DAA did. That never got developed. That land sat leased from 2006 to 2017, and it sat bare up until, well, it still remains that way. And our expectation coming out of this, there would be a recommendation to consult very closely with the Galarin residents. And that's always been our intention. We're just trying to understand what the best timing is on that process. Is it before it comes to you, during, or after, or is it all three? I'm not sure. And maybe shame on us for doing that. We provided during opportunity for input, but clearly there's an opportunity for more consultation. And we'll happily do that with the residents. And I've actually spoken to the gentleman that was speaking earlier today and has probably given us, in terms of input, the most reasoned response, and very passionate, very articulate, very thoughtful. So in terms of when this submission came in, we take a deep breath and go, I mean, the easiest thing to say is no, forget it. It's not 15 meters. This site is bigger than what it has to be. Doesn't necessarily, you're trying to put a square peg in a round hole. But we work our way through it and say, well, does it align with Sydney's OCP? Does it attract and accommodate high quality employment intensive industries? And I would say yes. Does it align with our zoned uses? Of which, quite honestly, when you look at the land uses in the OCP for Sydney and our uses, there could be considerably worse developments on an industrial site. What other locations do we have on the airport? We would look and say, no, there aren't. It might need a land use change. That could take a year. There really aren't any suitable sites. So you either say no or decide to proceed. What's the quality of the development? You know, that's a big consideration. And so speaking with the developer, that this building is designed for electric fleet to be fully electric in 5 years. They have a solar array that planned. So I looked at that, appears to be a very green building. There's a financial commitment of which they're willing to put a bond aside of, I'm told, up to $250,000 for enhancements to the Galarin neighborhood. And I think those are really important initiatives, and that they're willing to work in terms of a landscaping plan. So you say to yourself, does this present an opportunity to revitalize the neighborhood? And, you know, it's clear to us that not everyone's going to agree with these kind of developments. And so it's always a challenging part. When we have a development like a Titan Boats, it's virtually invisible in terms of community feedback or concerns, and it moves forward. And people say, well, why? Because it zones and it's the right height, perhaps. And that's what we're hearing in terms of the key issues on this particular site is about height and mass. I would say to you, quite honestly, in a perfect world, and I wish it was 15 meters, and that all the regulations and all of those are met. But in the case, it's not an opportunity to scale it to that size. So we're welcome the comments from the town of Sydney in terms of the opinion on this particular building. And that's what we're going to be, what I've seen so far. I think many of those issues can be addressed, but it's very difficult to address the overall height issue and the mass issue. When I look at some of the economic benefits, I look at $325,000 a year tax base for the town of Sydney, and it's not for me to say at the Victoria International Airport to say, this is a good thing for you. I can just highlight that it's a tax opportunity. It's a good revenue opportunity for the airport. It's multi-millions of dollars over the life of the lease. And quite frankly, yes, do we have an eye for revenue diversification to prevent financial risk against future COVID downturns or pandemics? Of course. Is this materially going to change our financial position? It won't, but it certainly helps. I look at the employment opportunities that this particular facility could create and the construction jobs. And I think it's really a question that you have to work yourself through. Is a brownfield site, is that, or is this, and the status quo, is that better than where we are today? So I look at the traffic. The other big issue is traffic. And even the most positive comments that are coming through from like the Chamber of Commerce and Business Centric that see the economic advantages of this would say, you've got to fix the transportation infrastructure. You've got to think about Sterling, you've got to think about a roundabout, and you've got to improve traffic at the highway at 17 and Beacon. I think the one issue that probably bothers me the most is the discussion on transparency. And we pride ourselves at the airport in being completely transparent. And that may not feel that way to the Gallatin residents because of timing, but I can tell you that when we went through this gateway process, which was a learning experience for the airport, we actually followed the municipal process to a T. And we didn't have to. We didn't have to choose. We chose to do that, to pretend that land is municipal land. We'll go through the zoning, we'll go through all the public meetings, and we'll have council weigh in yes or no. This is a very different issue because this is not a land use change. It's not a change to the OCP. It completely aligns. But we're more than willing to have that communication with the local neighbors. If this development, just prior to signing any development permit, and certainly if we do end up moving forward, working with the residents throughout. I mean, that's our commitment. That's how we operate as an airport. And what our hope is that we're going to get very thoughtful comments coming out of the town of Sydney. Again, that's why we have the development accord. So what have we heard so far? We've got 35 emails. I understand the town of Sydney have more. It seems to be split about 50-50. In terms of the good, it talks about economy, taxes, job creation in the future. It focuses on sustainable design. And it's the right place, the right time, and the right use. And it's a really good opportunity to modernize the west side of Sydney. In terms of the negative comments, it's talking about abuse of power, as Victoria International Airport, disrespecting the local neighborhood. We talk about the building mass and the actual size and the scale, which you heard one of the speakers talk about earlier, the lack of transparency, noise, viewscapes, and the overall environmental impact, which again, I believe it was Mr. Enright was speaking to. I think, as I was mentioning earlier, it was Mr. Irwin that probably has the most thoughtful and articulate letter that I've seen, and I do look forward to continuing the dialogue with him. So in terms of closing, I mean, I've looked at, I don't know what all the recommendations that will come out today, but what I understand them to be, some of the big issues would be a roundabout, and we can certainly, as Victoria International Airport, commit to undertaking the lead in the development of that roundabout. We may be looking for financial partnership and support from the local municipalities, and we'll certainly be seeking funding at a federal level if it's available. Obviously I can't commit to that, but I can commit to having the roundabout developed. And we're actually working on a design now. and we would look for implementation in 2022. So those are concerns about some of the traffic issues. I think the Sterling alignment is something that's a bit more of a challenge, but I can broadly commit to that. I think it needs to be done. I can't necessarily give a timeline. I can certainly say it's within 3 years in terms of Sterling. I'm going to have to certainly work through our board of directors on that particular, because we're starting to talk about a $3 or $4 million commitment. But again, it really depends if we can get some kind of partnership funding in that. We'd certainly undertake that. But the roundabout, most definitely. In terms of Highway 17 and Beacon, well, I mean, that issue's there regardless of us, but we're more than willing to talk to the MOTI and understand what might have to be done. I know when we went through the process with the Gateway development a number of years ago, it was really focusing on twinning left turn lanes and some improvements to Beacon. And I don't imagine those have changed materially. I don't know what the town of Sydney, quite honestly, has done with the intersection in the last 4 years. I haven't paid that close attention to it, but again, we'd certainly have that conversation. In terms of frontage and improvements and sidewalks, yes, definitely. In terms of location of the side entrances, some are easier than others. Skylark is certainly an option. It's not as easy to change the alignment on John Place. But again, we can work with the neighborhood on that and get more input. The civil engineering, communicate on all issues. Yes, of course. Telecommunications and electrical underground. Yes. So I think those are the biggest ones that I'd seen. The issues on the east elevation, I think we can do that. The biggest issue though, we can't change the height. That's the more difficult one, is the height and the mass of the building. So again, I just come back that we really need to get our mind around collectively, is there a greater net benefit of this particular development? Is this the right thing to do right now for the town of Sydney? And, you know, from the airport's perspective, we're not the lone judge. I mean, we value the partnership. We're not here to disrupt and ruin the livelihood of everyone in the town of Sydney. That's not really our goal. We're trying to be responsible neighbors. We're trying to do the right thing. And, you know, clearly it's difficult to make that comment when not everyone's going to agree with you, because we all have different perspectives. But I just honestly think it's important for council to consider, you know, what's the status quo? What are the options? And is this a better net benefit going forward? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dickson. We very much appreciate you coming before council and your presentation this evening, covering a wide range of points and community concerns. I would now like to turn to council colleagues and to ask questions of Mr. Dickson. Councillor Rintoul.
If I could just interject for a moment, I would ask. I mean, I'll try and answer some. If you have very technical questions, I might not have all the answers, but we'll certainly endeavor to get back to you. I was really here to more give you a broader overview of our background and the intent and the philosophy on the design, but certainly do my best to answer what questions I'm sure you all have. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Dickson, for coming forward this evening and addressing council and Sydney residents with respect to this proposal. I think we recognize the partnership the town has had with the Victoria Airport Authority, and that's likely in part some of the surprise associated with this proposal. And I know you touched on it in your presentation, Mr. Dickson, but if you circle back to the selection of this lot, given the number of variances that the Airport Authority is going to afford to this project around mass in particular, and recognizing the traffic challenges that this development will present, and frankly the noise considerations for residents. Gallaran Road and the residents adjacent to Gallaran Road are meant to be addressed and reviewed certainly very, very closely by the Airport Authority with regard to development. So this lot, you know, why this location? I get that it's been leased since 2006 to 2017 and nothing happened. I think we all get that someone else will come along eventually and lease it. Something will happen there on that parcel. So so why this lot for this particular project when you talked about zoning challenges elsewhere? Elaborate on those so we can try and appreciate the position you're in with your land holdings.
Well, it really, the short answer is that within the airport lands and where it's zoned industrial, this is the site that is zoned industrial that would align. The rest of the airport lands is either not zoned or we don't have that anything that would be suitable for this particular development. And you know, again, we're certainly open to the debate and the discussion if this particular site is suitable for the development. You know, we've gone through a process with our reviewers through Urban Systems, and again, we've submitted it to the town of Sydney for their consideration and feedback onto the suitability of this particular site and development.
Thank you. And if I may, Mr. Mayor, then you touched on contributions and taking a leadership role in addressing infrastructure, and I'm sure you'll hear this evening from the town that that's critical in our position. You also spoke about amenities specifically to the Gallaran neighborhood, and you spoke to $250,000. If you're in a position to elaborate on that, please do before you're finished. But specifically, you know, at our last meeting, and certainly feedback from residents has been around noise pollution, traffic in general in that neighborhood. And you've heard that, and York has heard that, without going out and engaging yourselves at this point, and I appreciate that you're prepared to do so. But what steps since our last meeting 2 weeks ago have York disclosed to you that they're willing to take to help address those concerns?
Well, the things that I do know, they've talked about engaging a local landscaper to improve the green space and the height. They've even talked about developing a green wall. I think most of the noise issues and things they've addressed in the submission or in the presentation to you. But in terms of discussions with the legal, I mean, I guess we need to hear, in fact, what might be the most appropriate way to make improvements.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My last comment, I'll yield to my colleagues. I did ask also if you could elaborate on the $250,000 that you mentioned to the neighborhood. What's the intent behind that, and are you referring to infrastructure, public amenities, or can you fill us in on that aspect, please, Mr. Dickson?
I'm sorry, I missed you're a little difficult to hear.
I beg your pardon.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
I can.
Thank you. So if you could please elaborate on the reference you made to the $250,000 to neighborhood amenities and how you envision that dialogue and the source of that contribution to the neighborhood, if you're in a position to speak to that.
Well, like I was saying, I think a lot is going to I mean, first of all, we're going to have a challenge with some of the individuals in the Gallaran neighborhood. You either just are, I mean, the building's too high and it's too broad and it doesn't fit. And so it becomes a very difficult discussion. And so, I mean, but we have to pay attention to that, of course. There are some in Gallaran that I don't know the numbers that may think it's a good idea. But I think we have to engage in that discussion with the residents. So we'll have to work out exactly what that form will be like, but we'll have to do it. Always plan to do it in the coming weeks. It's just part of what we need to do.
Thank you.
And, yeah. So I wouldn't want to prescribe what the solutions would be.
Thank you. I'll turn to other colleagues if they have questions. I'll turn to Councillor Fallett, then Councillor Wainwright, then Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Mr. Dickson, for coming in tonight and for addressing some of the issues from your perspective. And I appreciate your clarification. I took an opportunity over the weekend and this morning to just stop and hang out in the Gallaran neighborhood and just look at the pulse, the ebb and flow of traffic. And I was there this morning with the school bus came by for kids. So one of the things that came to mind is the proponent, or York Realty, brought forth a plan for the traffic flow of when deliveries into the center would happen and when deliveries would be leaving. And they fit them into a very nice little niche that shouldn't interfere with life in the neighborhood as such. But there are no guarantees that the business is going to be able to keep to that schedule. Market demands, whatever can change, and all of that. So we're sort of looking and saying, oh, well, this is great, but how is this going to fit in when, and it most likely will change. When I rode over this morning, as I came along the flight path and crossed over Canso and the other road there by the control tower, and one of the delivery trucks was coming out quite quickly out of that road, coming up to the yield sign. And my concern is that we can have all the speed signs and reduced speed that we want. The drivers are still going to be on a time limit. So I guess I have to have a question here for you. How do we deal with this as a community? This is a concern for me, that the traffic is going to have a greater negative impact than we are being told about now. How do we deal with that?
Yeah, so like, I don't necessarily know how to answer that. If you have a developer or a tenant that's sort of telling you one thing and something else is going to happen, I don't believe that. What I do understand is that the proposed tenant is built to scale. We could debate scale, but their business scale, I'll say, and if they reach a point of increased demand, would build elsewhere in addition to this. So what I do understand is that there's 150 personal vehicles coming in over a short window. There's about 1.6 vehicles a minute or something like that moving, and they're staggered shift, those people on site. And then what you have is another 150 Sprinter vans leaving the site over a 2-hour window. So, and then you have the Sprinter vans returning, and that's in mid-morning, sort of outside the peak. And it's intentionally to avoid traffic congestion. And most of the vehicles returning starting at 7:30 p.m.
So if I understood you correctly, you're saying that if market changes, the business owner would probably look for a secondary site.
Yes.
So that is to give us some assurance that what they're proposing for delivery times both to the center and then leaving is highly likely that is going to stay.
That's correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Dickson, for coming tonight. Some of your comments have been very helpful, and particularly your intention to consult the Galloway neighborhood prior to signing the permit is certainly going to be a welcome message. Some of the things I would have asked about have already been covered. So there's one thing that came up during the public participation I'd like to pick up on, and it was the Sydney Community Association asking us about our decision to give up our authority to VAA with this accord. My understanding is that the town of Sydney never had authority to override a zoning decision or a development decision by the airport. Am I correct in that?
No, you're 100% correct in that. And that's why, in terms of the transparency issue, I do take issue. Simply because we've had a development accord in place for 21 years. And many of the airports in the country are federally, well, they're federally regulated. They have their own land use plans, and some choose just to completely ignore municipal zoning and municipal needs.
I confess that I was on Sydney Council prior to VAA taking it over, And I do recall the days of of Transport Canada running the airport, totally ignoring us. So I have to say that an agreement between the airport and the town on how we would work together to manage development approvals is quite welcome. I would comment that I don't think we envisioned a development of this scale when that was drafted, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
No, and you know, I'll be totally honest. You know, my preference would be that was something of that really didn't raise the concerns about mass and variances, because then it leads to accusations or discussions on abuse of power and disregard and, you know, cavalier planning and irresponsible planning and the like. But that's not the case. Is that we could have said no. We made a decision that this looks, for all the reasons I outlined earlier, this looks interesting for us. It looks interesting to me, for the community. What does the town of Sydney think of this? And let's put it through a 40-day review process, and let's have the experts, the town planners, have a look at this and provide us with comments.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan.
Mr. Mayor, thank you, Mr. Dickson. So one of the benefits, the economic benefits that this development is, the first thing that you and other supporters have brought up is the idea that this will be creating jobs. And when I saw this development and the number of jobs, I thought this was actually a flag for me in the opposite direction, because one of the first things that we hear, or the things that we hear about limitations to economic development, particularly in our industrial area, is lack of skilled labor. And this extends right across Sydney. Is just, there are help wanted signs everywhere. A lot of people have given up even advertising for jobs because we have a chronic shortage of labor, and particularly skilled labor. And so what I'm concerned with, and what we have heard from other people on the west side, is that they're having trouble getting staff because of the transportation issues. In order for them to, their workers, particularly families, our resident from the west side there lives in one of the remaining neighborhoods that's affordable for families of that working age, is that they're having to actually commute from Colwood. And so we're looking at actually creating a transportation issue that goes all the way out to the western communities because of that need to draw this additional employees up here, and our chronic housing shortage will just be even more exacerbated. And so what I'm wondering is if you at the VAA, if you've had discussions with your developer. I know I brought it up with Mr. Woolsey as well, or with the potential tenant, about strategies about how you might be involved with others on the industrial side, about how they're actually going to be able to obtain these workers that will possibly be a critical issue for them.
No, I haven't. It's a very good, I can tell you I have been involved, not as much recently, with the whole Sydney Industrial Group. And I'm acutely aware of the transportation issues and the housing affordability issues and the appeal of Langford. And, it's an appeal in terms of affordability or housing quality of life, let's say, but it's not necessarily from a transportation access point from Langford to the peninsula. I think it's a much bigger issue than Victoria International to solve, but certainly we can have those discussions. I don't know if I can come up with an answer for you, but we can certainly have those discussions.
Thank you. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any more questions. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dickson, for being here tonight. Thanks for that was a good sort of summary you gave at the beginning about the MOU and the report. And so I just want to drift back there for a bit. There's lots of things in there. I'm sure you're aware about, having a good relationship with the local government, endeavoring to be in harmony, looking at our bylaw, all that sort of stuff. So I'm sure you're familiar with it. My takeaway from that is that development should be what's in the best interest of the community, And I believe that the spirit of those documents, is that the developer would be aiming to respect the bylaws of the local government, but it also accepts that there's very unique circumstances in operating an airport. And so the airport authority needs to have some latitude to exercise what they need to do with their land to accommodate planes coming and going, right? And so, for example, it would be appropriate for the airport to veto a municipal bylaw that exceeded the height that is safe for aircraft. But what I don't, what I kind of struggle with is that I don't believe the spirit and intention is that the airport would override the bylaws and the concerns of the local government for reasons that are not related to those specific things of operating an airport. And so in this case, it seems that, wanting to have a variance for the height and mass of that building really exceeds what is in our local bylaws, and it is not related specifically to airport operations or safety or aviation. And, so it concerns me, I guess, whether the airport is going to heed, our concerns and our bylaws in respect of that. And I guess who in the end gets to decide what is in the best interest of the community. So just throw that out to you in terms of how do you see the airport's role, and how do you see our concerns and our community's concerns being addressed, and what role they play in the process?
No, I mean, that's a very good and thoughtful question. I think the last thing you'd want is an airport without a development accord, and an airport that just said, you know what, we can build to the airport zoning regulation, and we're going to go as high as we want, and just get used to it, because that's how we operate, and we don't operate that way. So we have an accord that specifically addresses all those items that you raised. And so now it's a question of pretty much what I said in my opening comments is this something that we entertain? And we put it to the town planners and intelligent engineering staff and city planners to thoughtfully weigh in on this proposal. And if there's something that's concerned, I mean, this is not the first variance I'm sure council's seen in the town of Sydney. And we're certainly not the first development in the world to have a variance. People might argue that 22 meters on 15 is a bit ambitious. And they may argue that the site coverage that you're dealing with is maybe too large for that particular site. But I would argue that you're going to get probably the best possible development that you'll ever see on that particular brownfield site, and all the other benefits that I talked about. So, I mean, we have to weigh all the comments that will come in tonight from you, and that's our process. Does that answer? I hope that addresses your questions or concerns. I don't want to leave you hanging.
Sort of. I mean, I'll go into a bit more about Galaran and previous comments that this project is a good fit with our OCP. And, you heard in public participation, and I'm sure you're aware of the very specific mention of Galaran in Sydney's OCP and in the Airport Authority's development guidelines. And although that is an industrial area, both of our organizations recognize the importance of that residential community. And that is something that even as that area develops, that yes, there might be more mixed use in that area, but the plan is to have a significant residential population in that area. So, right. So what I worry about is that, we seem to be dismissing, the importance of that area You know, and at a time when, you know, it's one of those things we got to weigh, right? Of economic benefits, jobs, that sort of thing. But, you know, another thing that we hear from our businesses is one of the big issues for them is lack of affordable housing. And so what I worry about is that we seem to be, the impression is that we're sacrificing the Galaran residential neighborhood, you know, hundreds of people who are living there, who plan to live there in the future, for one big building. And so it's hard for me, and I think the community, to understand how it's a good fit. And
Yeah, I think in terms of the OCP, what I understand, sort of longer term, you're looking at 3 to 5 story buildings potentially over time. I think you've addressed the infrastructure, transportation issues, the lack of sidewalks, the beautification. I mean, in my mind, West Sydney's been neglected for years. And it's not a criticism, it's just an observation that, you know, there is an opportunity to enhance the road infrastructure, enhance some of the sidewalks, enhance some of the landscaping around the area. And, you know, we can leave the site brownfield the way it is. I mean, you saw it turned into a trailer park storage area for a period of time, and that certainly didn't make me feel very good. It's abuse of use, and it's ultimately led to the transition to a vacant site. And so it's with a lot of consideration we bring this forward.
yeah,
But we very much want the comments of the town of Sydney and the planners to,
yeah.
you know, tell us.
So I
Give us
guess,
the thoughts, give us the recommendations, or, you know, I don't know how else to say it.
yep, okay. And I guess there's one section in the guidelines somewhere that once we express our concern, that the applicant will make revisions to the plan addressing any airport and community concerns. So are we, I guess I'm going back to my question about who has the final say on what's appropriate for the community. So if the town and, you know, is not happy with the variances being provided, if we don't feel things are being addressed to our satisfaction, if the Galaran, the residents are not happy, who in the end, you know, gets to say we're going ahead or we're not? And it's
I think it's ultimately Victoria International Airport. The authority is going to make a determination, but it's not going to do it in a vacuum. I think that's the key point. You know, the other challenge in any kind of consultation, I mean, what do we get, a majority vote? Or, you know, I mean, it's always challenging. You deal with this all the time on council. And, you know, if someone asks you for the greater good of the community, well, they're very different perspectives.
Yep.
Yeah, so you might take an environmental lens, you might take a transportation lens, you might take an economic benefit lens. There's lots of different lenses to look at, and it's very difficult to do that. And that's why we rely very much on the input through the accords on how to best do this.
Yeah.
I mean, the one thing will tell you that, you know, any consultation will be before, as I'd mentioned, the permit is issued, and even during, you know, if the permit goes forward and if this development proceeds, the consultation doesn't stop there.
Okay, thanks.
They just have to be, I mean, this is a sensitive site. You know, like I've referred to many other sites on the airport lands that you're probably not even aware of are being developed and haven't paid attention to, and we haven't got Facebook pages and other, you know, opposition groups to this particular. And I don't like that as an airport. I mean, we're trying to be a good community partner. We're trying to build out and do the right thing. We're very proud of the airport that we run. And whenever we get into contentious development issues, it's uncomfortable for us. You know, we're trying to do the best we can, and you know, we're trying to work through the process, but it's a difficult process because not everyone's going to be pleased.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Thanks for that. Just a couple other just minor things. I was just wondering if you could give a bit more information. I think you mentioned something about environmental issues earlier, but in looking in the guidelines, it mentioned an environmental checklist and an environmental construction surveillance program. If you can just tell us what those are, what they involve, and are those being put in place for this development?
Yeah, they are. So all the environment, so first of all, there's the environmental review on the site to make sure that soils, no contaminated soils, and you have to have a reference point for transition to a new tenant. So you have a reference point for the condition of the soils, and we're doing environmental monitoring throughout. So we do audits on all our tenants throughout, not every tenant every year, but throughout over a period of time. We do the environmental monitoring.
Okay. And then my last question, I think, is just about stormwater management. So it was something that staff had mentioned in their report. As you know, the Transport Canada and the town have just spent a lot of time and money to clean up the Ray Creek as a result of runoff from the airport after, several years. So that's, something on our mind. So I'm just wondering, what sort of plans do you have there for in terms of containment of stormwater on the site, and then monitoring for, pollutants or whatever that might be released into the storm system?
Yeah, so in terms of that, so there'll be stormwater containment. I'm also checking into, I saw a comment from the town of Sydney about the sizing of the piping, and our engineers are telling me that it's probably sized correctly, but we still need to validate that particular point.
Okay, that's good. Thank you very much for that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Dickson, for coming this evening, giving your time, and for taking the questions. I know it probably is not easy. And I will just firstly apologize if I seem not my normal peppy self. I might be having to speak up to talk. I was vaccinated 4 hours ago, so I'm feeling a little of impacts. As far as the lot, you keep referring it to brownfield, and I have to say that I can't help but think of beauty's in the eye of the beholder. So some people may think that a gravel lot with weeds and bushes is a little more attractive than a massive building with a paved parking lot. So, and I'm sure the animals that have probably gone in there and created homes probably think it's pretty beautiful. That as an aside, I guess in our package, which I'm sure you've probably seen, we received a letter from the Wasayanich Leadership Council, and I know you spoke to this a bit earlier. I find that incredibly troubling. I was really thrown off when I read it, and I read it several times, and to me that is very problematic as far as the engagement goes. And as far as the Galaran residential neighborhood, you spoke to earlier, when do you communicate with them? Is it before? Is it during? Is it after? And I appreciate that you're willing to have that consultation before you sign any kind of permit. Mm-hmm. But I would respectfully say that the time to do that, given the dramatic nature of this project, then you would have seen that as it came across your desk, and knowing how it's going to dramatically alter this particular neighborhood's life moving forward, and the residents that live there. You should have reached out before. And I don't want to draw comparisons, but there was another development proposal that came on 5th and Lochside, and the developer reached out to all the neighbors long before we even ever heard of it. And it would have been something as simple as what you gave to us in a letter to each of just mail a letter to each of the residents. And I'm hoping, because I think that, the cow's already out of the barn sort of thing. So I think you would have avoided a lot of this Facebook and things you're talking about if you had just reached out, because as you mentioned, they're an oft ignored, oft overlooked neighborhood, and they have been for several years. And this just adds to that feeling. And I don't want to pick bones here, but I just feel like if had somebody reached out to them and shown them some respect and some decency, a lot of this could have been avoided. It might have been a smoother transition. There's not a question there, I know, but is there any, incorporating what I'm saying here, do you think maybe that could have been handled a little differently, looking back?
Yeah, no, I mean, as CEO of the airport, of course, I have to own that. If there's a feeling that the process could have been better, I mean, again, we got our steps. We thought the steps would be best to go to council first and then follow. I think in hindsight and what I've seen from many of the residents, that it would have been useful to intimate to council that we were contemplating this without more detail to come, and then engage in more public consultation potentially. And simply because of this particular development, it gets more complicated on other projects on airport lands, but because of this particular project in the proximity to Galleran, certainly.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, and we're also, I will say that with Wasonic First Nations, the Wasonic Nation, it's evolving. We've historically, I've been CEO of the airport since 2011, and 100% of my dialogue has been with the chief of SACO. And this has evolved, I would say, in the last 3 or 4 years when Vancouver International Airport and Musqueam First Nation established a friendship agreement. And we're actually in our lease with the federal government. When we get into any kind of financial agreements or land issues or Douglas treaties, the way our lease is structured is that the federal government is to take that position. And YVR got very frustrated with the federal government and negotiated their own arrangement. We started down the path with Wasonic, and then those conversations, I'm actually thankful that CERNAC now has a table with Wasonic Nation, and the airport is a subset of that, because there's many bigger issues that are bigger than what the airport authority can address in terms of ownership of the lands and many complex issues. And we always get brought into that discussion, and it frustrates First Nations incredibly, and it frustrates me. And so we're trying to find the best way to do that. So we advise, I don't mean to, it's difficult, but we advised SACOM March the 9th of this particular project and asked for 30 days review. Are there any comments or concerns? I will also say on every single one of the projects that we have under construction now, we have First Nation monitors, SACOM First Nation monitors on sites. So, I mean, in terms of the relationship, we're always trying to do the right thing. It never seems like it's quite enough, but we value very much the friendship and partnership with SACOM and Wasonic, and we're going to continue to try and do better.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor O'Keefe, you have a follow-up?
Yes, thanks. I'm just wondering in terms of timelines. So in terms of, so you're talking about having some engagement with the Galleran residents. Presumably you're going to get some more feedback from that and percolate what you hear from the town. What's the timeline in terms of completing your consultations, coming to decision, and then actually starting work on the project?
Yeah, I think we have to see the council's recommendations coming out this evening, of which I think we'll digest in the coming days. And then I would see consultation, where are we now, May the 10th, sort of completing over the next 3 or 4 weeks.
And then the plan, like for shovels to go into the ground, what's the sort of timeline expected on that?
I honestly don't know. I think we just have to work through what are all the recommendations coming through. And then when we go, I mean, obviously we have a developer that's eager and anxious to get moving, but we've got to hear what the residents have to say. Mm-hmm. And we have to hear what you have to say.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, colleagues. And thank you, Mr. Dickson, for coming before Council, providing helpful information to not only Council, but to members of the public listening in. And I know members will certainly follow this meeting at a later time. And thank you for taking our questions, which was also helpful information for all concerned as well. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you very much for your thoughtful questions and for giving me the opportunity to speak to you tonight. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening. So that concludes the presentation. We have no development permits separate from that. The VAA referral will come up later on our agenda. I will now turn to adoption of our minutes of the regular council meeting for April 26th.
There's a bylaw at 5A.
Oh, I'm sorry, I've moved a little too quickly. Thank you, Councillor. So I'll turn to item 5A, which is bylaws, and bylaw number 2215, the alternative tax collection scheme, and I'll turn to Mr. Hissick for an introduction, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this, the purpose of this bylaw is to put in place the method by which we collect property taxes and the dates on which we apply penalties. So we have been following this method for many years, but it just hasn't been officially formalized through a bylaw, and I'd like to take care of that. The one thing that is proposed to be different is that we are looking to put in a bit of a relaxation for those who claim their homeowner grant late, so that if they don't claim it on time, we have a chance to notify them, and then if they claim it by the second penalty date, we would reverse the penalty on that portion of the late taxes. And that particular change is timely because of the change in the administration of the homeowner grant. It's now being taken over by the province, and it won't be done by the municipality.
Thank you, Mr. Hissick. Are there any questions of Mr. Hissick? If not, we do have a recommendation. And we can move through 4 readings to adopt tonight if we so choose.
I'll move the bylaw number 2215, alternative tax collection scheme, be given first reading.
Second.
Those in favor? None opposed, motion carries.
Move second reading.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, those in favor? None opposed, motion carries.
Move third reading.
Second.
All in favor? None opposed, motion carries.
And move adoption.
Second.
Those in favor? None opposed, and that motion carries. Thank you, Councillor Garnett. We'll now move to adoption of minutes of our regular council meeting for April 26th.
Move adoption.
Second.
Any errors or omissions? All those in favor? None opposed, motion carries. And we'll turn to the minutes of our special council meeting of May 3rd.
Move adoption.
Second.
Any errors or omissions? Those in favor? None opposed, motion carries. We'll next move to, I don't have a mayor's report this evening, and I'll turn to councillor's report, and we do have Councillor O'Keefe reporting on the South Island Prosperity Project, SIP, and an update and their strategic plan. Councillor O'Keefe.
Okay, thank you. So some updates from SIP. We from our partners meeting earlier this month. A couple of events coming up on May 20th and June 17th about how the virus and the state of the pandemic on a global scale and how that relates to Canada and BC. So if you're interested in that, check out the SIP's website. Other things that they've been working on, they came up with there was an issue about having abattoirs on the island. So there is now the South Island Abattoir Feasibility Study that's been released to the general public, and SIP is now open for discussions with any interested personnel within your municipalities who are looking to further explore that topic. We're also recruiting for some new board members, 4 new board members that will be required. The biggest bit of news is their strategic plan, which has just been updated, and that's on the website. And I'll give you just some highlights from that. It's a big document. They talked about some of the emerging opportunities on the South Island. And one thing I thought was interesting is that Greater Victoria, as well as Vancouver, is known as having the X factor. That means we're one of the highest rated small or medium-sized cities in North America that has this intangible competitiveness factor. Those intangible factors include ease of doing business, innovation, environment, and quality of life. So apparently we're in a good spot for future economic development. Another trend toward new technology. So the pandemic revealed new ways of doing business through new technologies and collaboration tools. And so this could lead to an era of rapid productivity growth, and we need to help businesses to adapt to e-commerce. Also, areas of growth are clean growth in new green technologies and services. Another thing for us is that we're the heart of Cascadia. So this region from Victoria to Vancouver, Seattle, and Portland is one of the world's most innovative and productive regions. And SIP will continue to work on building connections with within the region. Some of the things that they're going to do in the coming years, track economic recovery and convene and collaborate on initiatives identified in the Reboot report. As recovery continues, SIP will change its focus to build greater economic resilience and future-proof the regional economy. They're leading a number of initiatives such as the Indigenous Prosperity Center and COAST, which is focuses on the marine economy. They'll continue to offer opportunities for education collaboration to members, continue to provide a platform for municipal collaboration, and attract new companies to the South Island, and also to tell our new story. So they mentioned that the current brand for this region has been mainly focused on tourism, but so they're looking to do more on that and communicate that to investors. I'll leave it at that unless people have questions. And I would move that this info should be shared with our Economic Advisory Committee, and that I would attend the next EAC to address any questions that members may have.
Okay, so that's a motion. Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Okay, any discussion or questions for Councillor O'Keefe on her report? Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it might be beneficial if you were to maybe describe to our audience what an abattoir is. Just because you kind of glazed over and people are probably going, what is that?
Well, that's where they butcher animals, basically, yeah. And so that was one of a need that was identified in the agricultural community on the island. Currently, a lot of chickens and other animals have to be transported to the mainland for that purpose. So this was seen to be something that would be good for food security and better for animals and the environment. So SIP sort of took the lead on gathering information on that.
Thank you. That's good clarification.
Thank you, Councillor. Further discussion? Seeing none, those in favour? And none opposed, motion carries. Thank you, Councillor. We'll next turn to committee reports, and I'll turn again to Councillor O'Keefe, who is our council liaison to the Emergency Planning Committee with reference to the March 17th minutes.
I'll move that we receive the minutes for information.
Second.
Discussion? Those in favour? None opposed, motion carries. And I'll turn to Councillor Rentoul, who was chair of our Committee of the Whole meeting on May the 3rd.
Thank you. I'll move receipt of the minutes.
Second.
Those in favour? Motion carries. And there is one recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The committee recommends, and I so move, that the 2020 financial statements for the year ended December 31st, 2020 be accepted.
Second.
Discussion? Are those in favour? None opposed, and that motion carries. Thank you, Councillor. We'll now turn to staff reports, and we'll turn to our first item, the VAA Development Referral at 9899 McDonald Park Road. We have a report from staff dated May 4th. Council and the public will be aware that Council met on April 26th and had a report from staff at that time. We referred it to staff for some more information, or on some points, and I will turn to staff for an introduction for this evening, please. Good evening, Ms. Verhagen.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This report on the agenda is a follow-up report to the first one that was provided. It contains a little bit of additional information for Council on the VAA referral, as well as some new information provided by the VAA and by York Realty, updated building renderings, information on the operations of the facility, as well as an updated access review. If you've got any questions, we'll do our best to answer them.
Thank you, Ms. Verhagen. I'll turn to colleagues. Are there any questions for Ms. Verhagen? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Verhagen, and we'll now turn to the item on our agenda. And I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So you'll see as a late addition to the agenda package that I've proposed some motions that I think would be a better starting point for our discussion than the motions that are than the recommendation that's in the staff report. So if my colleagues are open to that, what I'd like to do is make the move the first part of that to get the discussion started. And I can share that on screen so that people can follow along. I'm assuming there may be some wordsmithing or amendments. So without further ado, I'll just start off by sharing the my screen so you can see the first motion. And I'd like to move that Council directs staff to reply to the Victoria Airport Authority recommending that the VAA not approve the development without first engaging the Wasanich Leadership Council, providing opportunities for public input, and disclosing the name of the tenant.
We have that move. Do we have a seconder?
Second.
A second discussion, Councillor Wainwright?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that we're all generally of the position or the view that engagement with the Wasanich Leadership Council and the Gallagher neighborhood in particular. So this initial motion is to address that and basically saying don't approve the development without providing those opportunities.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm just going to turn to staff for a moment, and I'm sorry, it's just a little distraction. The birds are actually competing with the voices of councillors, and thank you. Sorry, Councillor, your last comment was?
Basically, I think the motion reflects our interest in not seeing the development approved without this additional consultation happening.
Thank you. And if I may, before, so we haven't moved and seconded, we're in discussion. I would just like to start with a comment. And that is, first, I would like to, we did have 68 pieces of individual correspondence to Council, many of which are in the Council package, but as I indicated at the open during the agenda approval, that we had many additional pieces of correspondence, and Council has been able to review all of those today. In addition to that, we did have a petition submitted. It was an online petition, and as of the most recent information, there was over 230 signatories to that petition who were not in favor of the development. I first want to thank all members of the public. We had a remarkable diversity of experience in our community. I'm always amazed by the experience that we have in our community in almost every facet of life. But we've had considered opinions from a broad range of individuals, including business executives, long-term business executives in West Sydney, members of the public who have expertise in a variety of areas, people who live in the Gallerin neighborhood, people who live in other parts of West Sydney, quite frankly from all corners of our community. And I want to express on behalf of Council a thank you to all members who on relatively short notice, members of the public who on relatively short notice gave us their considered views and input to this evening's meeting. Of course, we've already heard this evening that there is a wide diversity, a wide range of views. There are those who are strongly in favor of this project. There are those who are strongly opposed. And that creates a challenge for Council. Council wants to, in the course of its business, be able to reflect the diversity of views in the community. And I know there will be some, seeing this first motion, noticing that Council is not opposing this development. And I want to speak to that directly in that the understanding from Council is that the Airport Authority and the tenant York Realty have worked for some period of time on this development, and they are far enough along in their process where they have an intention to wish to proceed with the development, and the Airport Authority has the final approval in terms of issuing the development permit. As we've had a good explanation this evening of the Memorandum of Understanding, that provides a 40-day referral period to Council. And given that Council understands that it's the intention of the parties to move forward on this development, we think it is most constructive to provide the views of the public and Council to the VAA for them to consider as they move forward or otherwise on this project. And so really, we're considering the views of the public based on the rationale that was provided to us, and there was a lot of thoughtful considerations provided to Council. So I just wanted to speak to the public correspondence that we received, and as a bit of an introduction to this first motion. So I'll turn to any colleagues if you have discussion on the motion that is on the floor. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'm in favor of this. The thing that I'm struggling a bit with is the last bit about disclosing the name of the tenant. Because I don't know that, I mean, we don't do that for any other organization. And I don't know, you know, if disclosing the name of the tenant really is relevant to our discussion on this. It's a nice to know, but I don't think it's something that I would recommend to the Airport Authority. I'm fine with the public input and with Saanich Leadership Council, but I'm uncertain about that last little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. If I could add a comment and turn to Councillor Duncan, is that in Mr. Woolsey's, the president of York Realty, in his presentation to Council 2 weeks ago, he indicated that this is not a decision of the Victoria Airport Authority or the decision of York Realty to not announce who the tenant will be. It is the decision of the tenant to not disclose. We've expressed our concern with that, and the community has certainly expressed their concern with that. But I would share part of Councillor O'Keefe's view that with that information that we have before us, whether it should remain part of the motion. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. You said essentially what I was going to say, but I share Councillor O'Keefe's concern about it for the same reasons, that if this was, say, a commercial development with, you know, residences above, kind of the typical thing that we usually have downtown, a lot of the time, if they're going to be building that, they wouldn't even have a tenant in mind when they did. They'd simply be building it with the idea of what kind of tenant would be in there. And at this point, we know, you know, it's a warehouse distribution center, but whether we need to know who the name of the tenant is, whether that would affect the recommendations that Council would make, is something that I struggle with, about how that would affect our recommendation. I know that it will affect, or at least, you know, the tenant believes that it will affect, and this is why they have chosen not to disclose, as Mr. Woolsey pointed out to us. the way the public might deal with it, the expectations that might be built up around them. And so what I'm worried about is that if we were to request this, not only could it not be done, but that it will generate comments that don't necessarily apply to the development itself and have more to do with underlying community beliefs and expectations. And I'd like to avoid that if possible.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to Councillor Fallot, then to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I would thank you for your opening remarks on this, and I agree with my first inclination was to say I just want to turn down this application because of my concerns with traffic and with the height and mass of the building. If we as a council decide to veto and just say no to the application, we lose the opportunity to speak to what we can ask for. So I appreciate this opportunity that we can have some input. I also, having heard Mr. Dickson saying that he will do the outreach, etc., this motion just solidifies what he said. He gave us his word that he was going to be doing that. This just puts it down. And further to Councillor Duncan's comments just now, I agree also. I think if we, and I see that Councillor Wainwright has already taken the last part out, I think it's better we just focus on what we have before us and not focus on the tenant. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Before turning to Councillor Garnett and then Councillor Rintoul, we do have a motion on the floor approved with the wording in, so we should have an amendment to remove, appreciating what Councillor Wainwright has done. So I'll first turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With regards to that, I would also, I do, the wording's fine, but I do think we need something more specific for the Galaran residential neighborhood, and I wanted to word something in the fact that there's an onus upon the airport authority to reach out to them, to engage them.
Okay, I would ask Councillor Garnett that you consider specific wording, or perhaps
Let's see what Councillor Wainwright's writing.
Will appear.
Maybe put engaging after particularly? Thank you. That's good. Yep.
Thank you, Councillor. And so we now have two amendments, and they could be moved together at a particular time. I'll turn to Councillor. Did you want to continue, Councillor?
Yeah, sorry. No, I'm good. Thank you. That's good.
Okay, Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I appreciate your comments at the onset of this discussion as well. And personally, I think it's really important that we take the time to work through the series of motions that we're going to make to send a very strong message to the airport authority and frankly to the community that we're looking to support here. And I hope that our motions this evening can be unanimous and that we send that strong, clear signal that this council holds very, very strongly our recommendations to the airport authority and that raises our voice. Look, I think it's a shame that we're not disclosing the name of the tenant in terms of the airport authority coming forward with that information or the developer coming forward with that information. I agree with the comments of my colleagues that it puts a different lens on the discussion, and we're really focused on the impact to the neighbors and the impact on infrastructure. And so in the spirit of what I've suggested, that I'd like, I'm hoping that we can all, come to terms on the motions as we go through them. I would support an amendment if it's put forward to remove disclosing the name of the tenant. Having said that, it's my preference that they would have come forward and been proud of what they're doing here and raised the profile of our community and their business efforts in the process. And I can't think of an undertaking of this nature where that hasn't happened on airport lands or elsewhere for that matter. So I think it's unfortunate, but if this is a formal amendment that's put forward, I'll support it. Thank you.
Okay, so Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move an amendment, and I'd like to move that the motion be amended to read that council directs staff to reply to the Victoria Airport Authority recommending that the VAA not approve the development without first engaging with the Wasanich Leadership Council and providing opportunities for public input, particularly engaging the Galaran neighborhood.
So we have a motion to amend and a seconder. We have it moved and seconded. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Please proceed, Councillor Wainwright. I should mention, Councillor Wainwright may have touched on it, but I would prefer that we approach these individually, as we may tend to amend, and councillor members may have views on particular individual items. Councillor Wainwright.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, you need to call the question on the amended motion.
I certainly do. Oh, sorry, the amendment was approved. I do have to call the question on the main motion. All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you.
Okay. With respect to the next part, what I will be doing is moving this first block. So it would be, and I'll read it. I'll move that council recommends that approval of the development referral for the property at 9899 McDonald Park Road, York Realty, be subject to the following conditions. 1, that the VAA be a partner in funding and take a leadership role in working with York Realty, the town of Sydney, and other stakeholders to ensure a roundabout is designed and constructed at the intersection of Beacon Avenue West and Galaran Road, and that Sterling Way is realigned in accordance with the Beacon West traffic study, and that the roundabout be designed and constructed in a way that easily adapts to a 2-lane roundabout over time.
Second.
Moved and seconded. I'll start discussion with the mover, Councillor Wainwright.
So for the subsequent conditions to be adding, I would simply propose that those be moving an amendment to add whatever the item is to the list of conditions in motion number 2. And that's the way we can simply bring forward the additional ones one at a time. With respect to this one, Mr. Dickson already mentioned that they were willing to take a leadership role in doing this and being a partner in funding. So this looks like it's actually just formalizing something that he already verbally committed to doing.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to the seconder, Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And perhaps a question through to you, Mr. Mayor, or to staff at your discretion, or the mover may want to comment under stakeholders. I'm of the assumption that the intent here is to include the District of North Saanich in this discussion. We certainly recognize them as a neighbor and partner in infrastructure in this particular area, given North Saanich residents commuting to Sydney or elsewhere through this particular intersection, but also through their land development opportunities and ongoing interests at their Sandown Business Park. And so through to you, Mr. Mayor, to direct that question as may be appropriate, but I'm moving forward on the assumption that stakeholders includes the district.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Rintoul. And yes, when Mr. Humble and myself met with Mr. Dickson from the Airport Authority, and separately with Mayor Geoff and their CAO on forming the partnership for the Beacon West traffic study, and us sharing the $60,000 cost to that, we agreed that when that report was provided to our respective jurisdictions, municipalities in the VAA, that we would want to continue a dialogue using the information contained in the report for planning purposes. So yes, I would include that, and I think we could also include stakeholders at the discretion of VAA as to whether other businesses, were involved in that going forward as well. Thank you. I'll turn to other questions. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll wait for Councillor Wainwright to continue typing. We're doing this on the fly. Perfect. So I have significant issues with the traffic study itself. As a user of the road regularly, I found there was deficiencies and kind of assessments that I found were a little bit faulty. So, and I was quite concerned that they never investigated the option of realigning Sterling and then they talked about Sterling and Beacon in terms of a signal intersection, but they never looked at that option at that would now be a four-way intersection. And the reason I say that is because traffic flow aside, it's a safer option because you're now having traffic that's going to have to stop. And the reason I say that is because from experience driving through the Wellington, East Saanich, and the McTavish interchange, the common problem with accidents or near misses is that the people coming up and down the main roads think they have the right of way and they don't yield. I deal with that daily, and it's a real serious concern. So I have concerns about the roundabout itself from a safety perspective for the people that live in that neighborhood and for traffic. So I'm really, I'm having a real struggle with that. But I do appreciate and respect staff's assessment that if you're going to do this, do the 2-lane now rather than doing it later, because if nothing more from a cost effectiveness strategy, it's going to cost more money in the future and have to impact that already mess of a traffic situation we have twice as opposed to once. And I think it's going to grow faster than we think, and so we're going to be back there sooner rather than later anyways. And I'm going to be the thorn here, I guess, overall. As much as I supported the First Amendment, overall I don't support this project on this site. I don't think it's a good fit at all. He mentioned square peg into a round hole, and yeah, you can make that fit if you hammer it enough times, but usually it causes damage at some point. So I appreciate what everybody's done, and I will contribute to amendments, but I'm going to be voting no on them just because overall I don't think this is the right fit for this spot, and it's not because I don't want to be unified with council. I just feel like I want to take a stand on this and say that I don't think this is the right fit for that particular lot. I don't think it works in the neighborhood on many accounts that have been discussed, and even with the recommendations and changes we're recommending here tonight that they may or may not implement. They don't have to. He said they will, but they might not. I have serious concerns that this is going to cause a lot of issues. And I mean, my heart goes out for the people in that neighborhood, and I just feel like I got to stand up for them. I'm an advocate for them, and I need to be that way. So I hope my fellow councillors can understand that that's where I'm coming from tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, for sharing your views. And I'd just like to touch on the traffic aspect, not your latter remarks. And I may turn to staff, depending on if I pose a question. And that is the Galleran roundabout was designed when the Omicron development was proposed for the other 10-acre site. And it was designed with, by traffic engineers, and safety would have been of paramount importance. But one of the other considerations that is given, and I'm presuming, given that Watt, is recommending it, that safety has been the first concern. But another concern is also with regards to GHG emissions, and I think it's been demonstrated fairly clearly that a four-way stop versus a roundabout, there are significant differences in GHG emissions by vehicles having to stop and start. So I understand that safety is the first consideration, but that environmental concerns are also considered in traffic engineering. Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I might defer to Ms. Clary on this one as well, but yeah, it's my understanding that certainly roundabouts are deemed to be safer than a four-way. In fact, I think they're well supported by ICBC in terms of the severity of potential impacts associated with collisions relative to a four-way. So, indeed, I think they are safer. It's also the second roundabout that was designed for that area. The first roundabout was actually for Sterling Way and Beacon Avenue West at its current location back in 2004, where a roundabout was also proposed back then for a development.
Thank you. Ms. Clary, did you wish? Don't think so, so I'll turn back to Councillor Garnett.
Yeah, just for clarification, I wasn't referring to a four-way stop. I meant a signal intersection is in a set of lights. An actual signal, traffic signal intersection, not a four-way stop. That would be my reference.
No, I was talking about stopping.
No, yeah, I know what you're saying, but as opposed to the CAO was saying a four-way stop, I wasn't referring to a four-way stop. I was referring to a controlled intersection with lights, traffic lights.
Okay.
Yeah, so no, and I appreciate your discussion about the, yeah, and that is something to consider in terms of what you're saying. But and I understand what you're saying about the roundabouts, but I still think that from my perspective, and I'm not an engineer, I use this roadway every day. And I use all these traffic roundabouts every day, and they're not safe. I've been hit almost multiple times, once a week at least. I have to slam my brakes on or be blindsided. So I'm just talking from experience in road use. So anyway, that's just my perspective.
Thank you, Councillor. We appreciate your perspective. I did see Councillor Fallett's hand, and then I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to pick up on Councillor Garnett's comments about not giving his approval. And I respect that. And I struggled with the same question because I don't like the size, the height, the mass of the building. I think it is the wrong building for that location. I also have grave concerns about the traffic. The difficulty, if I say no, I'm speaking for myself now, if I say no to the project, what is the real chance that the airport is going to turn around and say a majority or all of Sydney Council has vetoed this project, we're not going to go ahead? I know that they are a good corporate citizen. I know that they do their work to be a good neighbor. But I'm really concerned if we were to say no to this project, that they would actually follow through and just stop the project, just say not sign on the tenant. If that happens, then that's wonderful. I don't think that that's going to be the outcome. I think they're going to try to pick up the pieces of what they've heard. But by speaking out and saying there are aspects to this project that we really don't like, but if you're going to go ahead and do it, then these things need to be done. I think we lose our voice to getting these parts in by approving the project under these circumstances. If we had a veto voice in this, then I would say we should exercise it. But my sense is we don't have a veto voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fallett. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thanks. Sort of on the same line of thought as Councillor Fallett. Yeah, I think it's important to note that we do not have a veto. So I want to clear that up for the community in case they had that impression. And I guess my concern is by just saying flat out no, as Councillor Fallett says, we lose our voice. And so in terms of advocating for the Galaran residents especially, we lose that opportunity. So I think from my perspective, it's important to very specifically and strongly state what the concerns are and use our voice as the Council of Sydney to amplify the concerns of the Galaran residents and our community. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'd also considered the possibility of making a recommendation to the airport authority that they deny this application. And, we could actually make a recommendation like that. And then we could follow that up with, but if you're going to approve it anyway, the approval should be subject to this. I didn't think that that was really an appropriate thing for us to do at this stage. Like, normally, we've had controversial development proposals come forward before, just a few over the last council term. The thing is, rarely, I mean, very, very rarely do you reject something out of hand the first time you see it. Normally what we do is we tell the proponent, here are our concerns, here are the things you need to do to address them. And then we give them a chance to do that before a decision is made to accept or reject. So in fact, like, I would not be comfortable accepting this tonight, and I would not be comfortable rejecting it tonight, because we haven't, had that dialogue with a proponent where we say, here are the major issues that we have with your proposal. Here's what we need you to do to address them. And that's really what this motion goes to. It's telling them what we see the issues being and what they have to do about it. And I think it is important that I think that's the right thing for us to do.
Thank you, Councillor. Further discussion? Seeing none, if we could move an amendment, as we have changed.
I'll move that the motion be amended by inserting the District of North Saanich immediately following the town of Sydney.
Second.
Those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Opposed? One opposed, the motion carries. And now calling the question, any further discussion on the main motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? One opposed, Councillor Garnett. The motion carries. Thank you.
Okay, and I'll move that the previous motion be amended by adding a second condition, that construction of the roundabout at Gallowran Road be completed prior to the facility at 9899 McDonald Park Road becoming operational.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion, Councillor Wainwright?
I think this one is pretty straightforward. We're anticipating traffic issues, and that roundabout is supposed to be the solution. So it's quite important that the solutions be in place before the facility really comes online.
Thank you. Further discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? One opposed, Councillor Garnett. The motion carries. Please continue,
Okay.
Councillor.
I'll move that the preceding motion be amended by adding a third condition, that a construction management plan to address potential impacts of construction on the surrounding road network be approved by the VAA and followed by York Realty throughout construction, including traffic control, truck routes, site deliveries, trades parking, dust control, etc.
Second.
Moved and seconded, Councillor Wainwright.
The proponents are suggesting a pretty aggressive schedule when they're talking about having this open in spring of 2022. And that suggests a significant construction workforce. It probably means a lot of prefab components having to be assembled on site. And given the height, they're going to need some pretty big cranes to be putting this all together. So construction does seem like it has potential for a lot of impacts, and this definitely needs to be thought out.
Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe.
Actually, just a question, I think, through you to staff. I recall staff saying that in terms of construction management, we were going to be doing some work on Gallowran Road, but as long as this construction was completed by, I believe, May 2022, that there would be no conflict. And so I guess I'm wondering, a question to staff, is this construction management plan, is this something that the airport authority would share with our staff as a normal course in something like this? And what sort of coordination might be necessary to ensure that their time schedule doesn't conflict with staff's schedule?
Thank you, Councillor. Sorry, that's a question through to staff?
Yes.
Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe. Typically, a construction management plan is not something that the VAA would share with the town of Sydney. If they do that for their own sites, that would be something that they review and control with the builder on their lands. We made this recommendation, staff made this recommendation as a suggestion for them to consider. We would be happy to participate in that plan, but it will be up to the VAA to review and approve that plan. And perhaps I can turn it over to Ms. Clary regarding the timing of construction of the town works there.
Thank you, Ms. Gray.
Yes, through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe. The main project for Galaran is actually scheduled for 2023. In 2022, we do have water main construction further north on Galaran and some minor drainage work to do near the development on Galaran, but it's relatively minor. We should be able to work around schedules for the construction of this site. And that's something that will just be an ongoing construction management. We'll just coordinate as lots of different construction sites do coordinate throughout the town and all over.
Okay, a follow-up, if I may, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, please.
And so I get back to staff again. What I'm wondering is there value in the VAA sharing this construction management plan? Is that something that we should include in this motion, or is that something that you would sort of do as a normal course of operating, or should we include that in the motion to share the plan with town staff?
Councillor O'Keefe, just before I turn back to staff, I would note that in the first staff report that we had at our April 26th meeting, there was a clause and would be willing to participate in the review of the plan given the use of town road rights of way to access the site. So we could include that after et cetera, but I'll leave staff to comment on that. Ms. Clary.
Okay.
Sure. So through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, I guess there's a few things here. So there's the construction management plan for the site, and then if they're doing any work on the town's right-of-way, they'll still need a right-of-way permit. The majority of Galaran is actually still on town's right-of-way. So through that, we can require coordination with the town if we do have to do work at the same time. But as mentioned, the work that we are doing on Galaran is, fairly minor compared to this project. So often we're good at coordinating with construction in a general area. They are on different properties, so we'd be able to keep our space and they'd be able to keep theirs. I see it more as a coordination through the right-of-way permit more than the construction management plan.
Okay, that's good, thanks. So yeah, that's fine to leave it as it is, and thank you for that input.
Thank you. Further discussion? I'll call the question on this amendment. All in favor? Opposed? We have one opposed, Councillor Garnett. The motion carries. Please continue, Councillor Wainwright.
Okay. I'll move that the preceding motion be amended to add a fourth condition, that the VAA commit to working with the town of Sydney and other stakeholders to address improvements at the Highway 17 and Beacon Avenue intersection in the event that significant reduction of service is evident after the facility becomes operational.
Second.
Moved and seconded, Councillor Wainwright, then Councillor Rantoul.
So the intent of this particular requirement is that they should have already done the roundabout realignment at Sterling Way, but if after the facility becomes operational, we're seeing a significant reduction in the performance of the intersection at Beacon Avenue and the highway, this motion would have VAA committing to working with the town of Sydney and other stakeholders, which could include BC Ferries, to address improvements. So this is a plan B if there are traffic issues after the facility becomes operational, that there is a commitment to do something about them.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And with respect to this, my initial comment may be that we should also clearly identify in this, I think, the District North Saanich as well as the province. And I suggest that because I think a coordinated approach to addressing this intersection is going to be required to see any success there. So I'm comfortable, certainly with what's suggested within the motion. Would like to see those stakeholders clearly identified. My only other item, and I may refer this through to staff, my recollection around the initial Watt traffic study referred to some elements of this interchange that are already struggling. And from personal experiences, I know, Councillor Garnett has mentioned, he is a regular commuter with work through these areas. I commute regularly as well through this intersection. I find some of the movements that are required there to be already somewhat stressed, and I think the traffic report, if staff would like to confirm, also indicate that. And where I'm headed with this is that I'm not as convinced that this isn't something that shouldn't be initiated at any rate. And so with regard to the motion that's before us, it could almost stop after the words Beacon Avenue intersection and remove in the event that significant reduction of service is evident after the facility becomes operational. In my mind, we can anticipate that the additional load on this major intersection is going to further compound already challenging traffic movements. And so I'll yield there and look for my colleagues' thoughts on this or staff's input with regard to the original traffic report.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Keefe, and then I'd like to speak.
Thank you. Yeah, I was also going to comment. I concur with Councillor Rintoul's comments for the reason he gave, and also I had some concern about in the event that significant reduction of service is evident. I guess I wondered how that would be measured. Does that mean that we have to have another traffic study to show that there has been another reduction of service? So I'm happy with more happy with what's been proposed as an amendment here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And I think it would be appropriate to remove that, and partly is from stemming from my earlier comment prompted by Councillor Rintoul that we went into the West Sydney North Saanich traffic corridor study as partners, and I think that given the results of the study, which extend from the Beacon Pat Bay Highway along Beacon Avenue West, McDonald Park Road, right down to the other McDonald Park Road interchange, that we want to consider planning for this corridor, in all aspects of it, appreciating that the timing for improvements could vary, and I think out of sheer cost would necessitate planning over a period of time, and infrastructure improvements over a period of time, but that we've been speaking about traffic movements and the safety of traffic movements, but it was also referenced in the West Sydney report that we want to consider multimodal transportation in this corridor, in terms of bike lanes, in terms of transit, and so on. And I think if again, we include the entire corridor in our future planning, we can plan more accordingly. I'm sorry, I don't know which the next hand I saw. Is it Councillor Duncan? Sorry, Councillor Fallot, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rintoul and Councillor O'Keefe addressed my comments, so I'll leave it there.
Thank you. I'll turn to Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just from a staff perspective, I'm looking at number 4, the VA commit to working with the town of Sydney, District of North Saanich, etc. Similar to the Galaran Road, potential for the roundabout taking a leadership role. My concern is around, with respect to the motion, that the way it reads currently, number 4, doesn't indicate the VA taking a leadership role. And what I'm concerned about is, at the end of the day, what is the role of the town in this? And there's a significant amount of staff resources that are going to have to be undertaken, both with respect to the construction of the roundabout, working with the VA on the design, determining the funding, etc., that will be involved. Again, all sort of unscheduled and not necessarily in our current strategic plan, our priority list. This is obviously a key priority for the town, and I can understand that. This is absolutely critical. But I think we need to be clear in terms of leadership responsibilities and who's going to approach who to undertake this work.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. So we do have 3 amendments to this motion, and I'll turn to other speakers if they wish to propose further amendments or comments before requesting a motion to amend. Okay, so we're amending an amended motion, which is permissible. If we could have a motion to amend, please.
I'll move that the amendment be revised to read that the VAA commit to taking a leadership role and being a funding partner in working with the town of Sydney, the District of North Saanich, the province, and other stakeholders to address improvements at the Highway 17 and Beacon Avenue intersection.
Second.
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, call a question. All in favor? Opposed? One opposed, Councillor Garnett. The motion carries. And if there's no further discussion, I'll call the question on the main amendment. All in favor? Opposed? One opposed, Councillor Garnett. The motion carries. Thank you. Please continue, Councillor Wainwright.
Okay, and I'd like to move that the previous motion be amended to add a 5th condition that frontage improvements for the development include a pedestrian sidewalk along all road frontages and vehicle parking on the frontage of Galaran Road as identified in the Beacon West traffic study.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Comment, Councillor Wainwright?
I think that one's straightforward.
Okay, Councillor O'Keefe? I would like to propose an amendment, and I would like to add the word drainage after the word include. I did have some correspondence with staff today, and a pedestrian sidewalk along the frontages could impact drainage, and should be a consideration as well, and I think good to include that.
Okay.
Okay, so if we get a motion to move an amendment to the amended motion.
I'll move that the phrase drainage and be inserted after the word include.
I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? One opposed, Councillor Garnett. The motion carries. Further discussion on the entire motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? One opposed, Councillor Garnett. Motion carries. Councillor Wainwright.
Okay. And I'll move that the preceding motion be amended to add a 6th condition that the location of site entrances, exits from Galaran Road be improved to better align with existing street intersections on the east side of Galaran Road.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion? Councillor Wainwright?
The intent of this one is better compatibility between the traffic trying to exit the development versus traffic exiting the Galleran neighborhood.
Thank you. Councillor Keefe?
No, that's good.
Okay. Any further discussion? I'll call a question. All in favor? Opposed? One opposed. Councillor Garnett, the motion carries. Number 7, Councillor Wainwright?
Okay, I'll move the preceding motion be amended to add a 7th condition that the civil engineer retained by York Realty continue to communicate with the town's engineering department regarding civil design and frontage improvements in order to resolve all issues prior to the issuance of a building permit by the VAA.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Councillor Wainwright?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This one is actually pretty broad in scope. Civil design includes a lot of things like location of the water meter, easement for maintenance of the fire hydrant, where the fire connections will be. It includes actually all the stormwater management. Those things are civil works. So everything to do with civil design, this motion is saying there should be ongoing dialogue between York Realty's civil engineers and the town's engineering team to resolve all the issues. And there are too many to try to itemize them individually.
Thank you for expanding on that. Any further discussion? Councillor Duncan?
Thank you. And well, in bringing up all civil issues, I'm seeing, and the mayor had brought it up earlier about the roundabout and the intersection and how that interacts with, the transit issues that were brought up before. Now, I don't know whether this is encompassed in there already, the way you phrased it, that if they're going forward with the roundabout construction and the realignment of Sterling Way and all of that, the existing traffic report, of course, is just based on the roadway, but we know that there's improvements required for the bike lane, and the bike lane will need to be realigned, and I don't know what they're going to do with it for a roundabout there. And so I don't know if that's covered in here because this is mostly with the building, or if that needs to be specified in a separate bullet as an additional amendment, or if you envision that being included here.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. If I could comment and perhaps turn to staff, that when I was speaking of multimodal transportation and the planning between the stakeholders, I think it would, while we've specifically referred to realignment of Sterling, the Galleran traffic circle, the Beacon interchange, we will be, if you add additional turn lanes from the highway onto Beacon Avenue West, those lanes are going to be realigned. That was going to happen, with a previous development proposal. So I think we're talking about multimodal for the corridor, but open to amendments if you wish to amend that. And I guess my question to staff is this primarily dealing with what we would call civil design public works? So as Councillor Wainwright said, the water, sewage, stormwater, meters, fire hydrants, et cetera. Or does it include other things above ground or other things besides?
Sure, through the mayor. At this point, we have discussed frontage improvements and the roundabout. However, yeah, I guess the roundabout may be a separate project from this particular development by the way these recommendations are going, even though they might happen at the same time. So I'm not sure if the whole roundabout would be encompassed in this. However, the frontage improvements for the actual development site would be encompassed. And we do have we do have a high-level sketch of a proposed roundabout from Watt that they developed post the report that went to council on the Beacon West traffic study, and it does incorporate multimodal transportation in it and realigning the bike path. So there is a high-level sketch for that already completed, just for council's information.
Thank you. And if I might refer to the one of the two staff reports, it did indicate, that there will be timing considerations to the above ground, that is the transportation, and the below ground, depending on which is done first, and frontage improvements. And so I think staff has brought that awareness, and I think we've encompassed it now through 3 or 4 different motions. Further discussion, Councillor Wainwright?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm wondering if inserting road into the motion, so it would read and road and frontage improvements, would be broad enough in scope to cover the communications about the roundabout and multimodal transport. And I guess that's a question through you to staff.
Thank you.
Sorry, so you're asking if this would encompass the roundabout as well by adding road and frontage improvements? I think it should be sufficient. We will continue to work with them on all sorts of different items, and the road will definitely be one of them. So,
thank you.
In that case, I'd like to propose an amendment that the amendment motion be amended to insert the phrase road and in front of frontage improvements.
Seconder?
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Duncan. Any further discussion on the amendment? All in favor? Opposed? One opposed, Councillor Garnett. The motion carries. Amendment carries. And further discussion on the full motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor of number 7? Opposed? One opposed, Councillor Garnett. The motion carries. And please continue, Councillor Wainwright, with number 8.
And I'll move that the preceding motion be amended to add an 8th condition, that all telecommunication and electrical site servicing be installed underground.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? One opposed, Councillor Garnett. The motion carries. Thank you.
Okay, and I'll move that the motion be amended to add a 9th and final condition, that the east elevation of the building design be revised to reduce its impact on the Galaran residential neighborhood.
Second.
Discussion?
So
Wainwright?
we've obviously one of the big concerns is the impact of this development on the Galaran neighborhood. And we've talked about things that need to be done. This doesn't specifically say anything about height or mass, but it does say revise the design to reduce the impact. And it leaves scope, whether that's aesthetic design, frontage improvements, green wall, whatever. But it's a very clear message to the airport authority that they have to make some revisions to make this better for the neighborhood. And earlier in our meeting, we heard from Mr. Dickson a commitment that they were going to engage the Galaran neighborhood and look at ways for making this better. And there was even some mention of up to $250,000 in bonding in relation to some kind of amenities or improvements for Galaran. So this seems to be consistent with what's already being promised, but flexible enough that it doesn't require a prescriptive response.
Thank you, Councillor. Further discussion? Councillor Rintoul?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'll just echo that this is, in my mind, a very important component to this. I think we challenged York Realty during Mr. Woolsey's presentation to look at this particular elevation, through the lens of, excuse me, through the lens of the immediate neighbors. And I was hoping this evening we'd hear a little bit more specificity around having this element revisited, and I think this amendment to the motion really speaks strongly from Sydney Council that we need to see this addressed in their proposal.
Thank you, Councillor O'Toole. Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favour? Opposed? One opposed. Councillor Garnett. The motion carries. I'll now turn to council colleagues. Are there any other amendments to this larger motion that would be a number 10 that would pertain as a subject clause that council wishes to consider? I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Councillor Wainwright, do you have things to put up there, or I was going to the motion that I had, so I would amend the motion to include item number 10, which is that the Victoria Airport Authority develop a plan for storm management to include upgrading of the VAA-owned storm water main on Galaran as part of the construction of the new development, and a plan to manage stormwater on the site, to manage discharge from the site, and to reduce pollutants into the storm system, which includes consultation with the town of Sydney, local First Nations, and local agriculture and environmental groups.
A second.
Seconder, Councillor O'Keefe, to moderate.
So I understand from Councillor Wainwright's earlier comment that perhaps stormwater is included in that earlier motion number 7, but I think it's important enough to highlight it and have a second motion. I think it's a significant issue that had been identified by staff. I know that Mr. Dickson said tonight it's going to be addressed, but again, I think like many of these things, we're wanting to highlight to the Victoria Airport Authority some of the things that we think are especially important.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Mr. Humble and then to Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to say from a staff perspective, and again, this is a staff perspective, but I really think we're starting to get into some of the operational elements associated with the Airport Authority. So I'll put that out there, but I am concerned with that level of detail that we're getting into around some of the recommendations, in particular this latest one.
Thank you, Mr. Humble, and I'll concur before turning to colleagues that I think the motion with regards to civil works was explained in a fulsome way, and that the engineers would be working on this to the satisfaction of all parties. But I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So there are a couple of things about this that I find problematic and don't think we should do. So earlier in the meeting, there was a question about the need to upgrade the stormwater main on Galaran Road that VAA owns. And the response was their engineers have looked at it and they don't think it does need to be upgraded. So a recommendation that they have to do something where there seems to be, the jury's still out on whether it's necessary, I don't think that's appropriate. It might be reasonable to ask them to review it and have a conversation with our staff, but the previous motion regarding civil works actually kind of covers that. The second thing I find problematic is the requirement for consultation with local agriculture, environmental groups, etc. And when we look at other developments in the town of Sydney, we don't do that with stormwater plans. And for Titan boats, okay, it's not as many square foot and all that kind of stuff, but it's the same storm drain they're discharging into, and there was no consultation with local agriculture, environmental, or whatever. So, like, we don't normally do that, and I don't think that's appropriate for a stormwater management plan, because normally what the plan would be an engineering plan, and if they're actually managing their stormwater, there shouldn't actually be the need to consult anybody if it's not creating an issue for the drainage system. Pollutants, maybe. But anyway, I just don't see this. I see this needs to get reduced in scope. It's covering too much ground. And I think what is reasonable to cover is in fact already covered by that civil works condition in the previous motion.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe, and then I have a comment.
Yeah, thank you. And so thank you to staff and to Councillor Wainwright for that, that insight. One of the reasons I brought this forward because staff had mentioned this as an issue in their earlier comments, and that they didn't see that this was being provided for. But if staff are satisfied that this is going to be covered by the civic things, I'm happy to withdraw the motion or just vote on it and let it fail. Unless anybody else has strong opinions on it to support it.
I'll turn to if there's any further discussion. If not, Councillor, you may choose to withdraw it. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to have this would be covered under point 7, but I had a question. I guess it would be through to staff on, I guess it's on the environmental groups and the local First Nations because of the pollutants issue, and the reason that these seem to come up here is regarding stormwater and continuing impacts has come up just in correspondence further down, well, partly in the Wasanish Leadership Council's letters specifically about the airport. I mean, noting the remediation that's had to be done in those creeks, which is not specifically regarding stormwater, but is simply ongoing industrial impacts and historic industrial impacts. This is ALR land, and as Mr. Dickson noted, they don't normally consider that at all, but we have a letter further down in the package in our correspondence for information from the Peninsula Agricultural Commission, or committee rather, and they note that the mismanagement of stormwater, particularly runoff from urban areas, has been a major problem for the agricultural producers. We don't have any in Sydney, and there aren't any obviously around the airport lands, but I just am wondering how much of the impacts that we are currently looking at when the engineers are controlling stormwater are volume specific and are just about shunting as much of it into off the site as quickly as possible, which creates issues for groups like Peninsula Streams, which are trying to manage our streams and our coastal habitats, and how much is actually about management of on-site stormwater so that we're kind of maintaining soil capabilities in the surrounding areas. And do we consider that at all current?
Thank you. Is that a question through to staff, Councillor Duncan?
I guess so, but how much that actually gets considered when they're looking at the civil works?
Thank you. We'll turn to staff.
Through the mayor to Councillor Duncan, they will have a stormwater retention on site. Many new developments have stormwater retention on site so that the system doesn't get overloaded through big storm events. So I believe they do manage the flow, and they do try to retain some on site and release it more slowly into the stormwater system.
Thank you, Ms. Clary. Councillor Wainwright?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I should also mention that we've got a stormwater management bylaw, a CRD one, that's been adopted and applies to the whole peninsula. And there are codes of practice and requirements, and they particularly kick in for big parking lots. So this particular development is actually going to trigger the review by CRD of their stormwater requirements. And they're probably going to need to get some kind of permit or whatever from CRD for their on-site pre-treatment works. Like there will definitely be oil and grease traps for something of this size, but likely more than that. And all I'm saying is they're going to have to comply with the CRD stormwater management regs, and those are about pollution control, not volume.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. Just a question to Councillor Wainwright on that point. So is the airport authority obligated to comply with CRD guidelines, or as a federal authority? I'm just wondering how that works.
The key thing here is that the airport authority is a partner in the liquid waste management plan for the peninsula. So they're bound by that commitment. And so I would say no, a CRD bylaw does not normally apply to federal land. Although in this case, because it's the liquid waste management plan doing it, it would apply.
Okay. So I'm happy to withdraw this motion.
And the seconder?
I'll support that.
Thank you, councillors. Okay, Councillor O'Keefe, would you like to move to your second recommendation?
Sure, let's try this one then. So I move that we add to the list that an environmental construction surveillance program be undertaken by the applicant through the construction period.
Second.
Councillor O'Keefe, to motivate?
And yes, and as Mr. Dickson mentioned early on, it does sound like this is in their plans to do this. So I guess it's just highlighting again something that's important for us that we would like to see happen, just as is the case with some of these other things.
Further discussion?
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, I'm going to turn to Ms. Verhagen and then to Mr. Humble.
Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, just to point out that I believe this exact wording is in the VAA's development procedures and is required for all development on their sites.
Okay, good. Okay, thanks for that.
Thanks, Councillor O'Keefe. And I think Mr. Dickson did make reference to it during his presentation. Mr. Humble, did you wish to comment?
Okay.
Yeah, my only comment, Mr. Mayor, was just following up on Ms. Verhagen's comment, is that given that it is contained within the VA development guidelines and it's explicitly indicated, I'm just wondering if it's our issue to get into. It's really, again, there are operational requirements under their guidelines to follow. I don't think we should be making a recommendation that they follow their own plan.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. Councillor O'Keefe?
Yep, okay, yeah, thank you for that. So I would be happy to withdraw the motion unless anybody else has strong opposition to that.
And the seconder?
I'll support that.
Thank you, councillors. Councillor O'Keefe, your third?
So I move that we amend the list to add in the following. The proposal in its current format is contrary to 9.2.3 of Sydney's official community plan, which states to ensure industrial activity does not adversely affect the residential community located east of Gallaran Road and south of Henry Avenue West.
I'll look to a seconder.
Second.
We have it seconded. I'll turn to Mr. Humble, and then I have a comment if it's not covered. Mr. Humble?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one of the things I'm concerned about, it's more of a comment. It's not really worded as a condition. I think the other aspect, it's also highlighted already in staff's April 26 staff report. that went to council, it outlines that particular guideline in our OCP as an issue that staff had, and it was reflected in one of the staff recommendations in that report, and I think it's already reflected in one of the previous recommendations from council to go back to the Galaran neighborhood, which Mr. Dickson has committed to. So I just think if it's added, it's something that maybe isn't advancing things, it's maybe going backwards a bit.
Thanks, Mr. Humble. I would ask Councillor O'Keefe to perhaps elaborate on how this is a condition, subject to, as is the heading on this larger motion.
Right, and you know what, that's a good point. I wouldn't classify it as a condition. I guess I'm thinking of it more as a comment, and maybe it's been mentioned before, and yes, there's consultation going on, but I think it's important to state because, you know, in the comments that we heard from Mr. Dickson tonight, his impression was that according to our OCP, this project is a good fit for this neighborhood. And based on what we've seen so far and heard so far, I don't think it is a good fit. So I think it's worth stating, but perhaps not as a condition. I would withdraw it as a condition and provide perhaps just a comment.
Okay, so if you're withdrawing as a condition, you're withdrawing as a motion?
Yes.
Okay, and turn to the seconder.
Yes, that's fine.
Thank you, councillors. And Councillor O'Keefe, you wish to follow up?
Yeah, so I would just like to add a comment to our submission to the Vancouver Airport Authority that this proposal in its current format is contrary to 9.2.3 of Sydney's official community plan, and which states to ensure industrial activity does not adversely affect the residential community located east of Galaran Road and south of Henry Avenue West.
Okay, thank you for, sorry, is that a motion, Councillor?
Does it, I guess I'm wondering, does it need to be a motion if it's just a comment that we're going to be submitting?
No, I think if it's a comment, it's your point is well taken, and I think as Mr. Humble made reference to that this statement is contained within the staff reports.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And you have a final consideration?
Finally, so I would make this as a motion, a separate motion, because this project is of significant interest to the community, that we publish these comments and recommendations on our website and in the Peninsula News Review.
Second.
Okay, so it's understood that this is not part of the longer motion with, I believe, 9 parts. You are moving this as a separate motion arising.
Yeah.
Did you wish to comment, Councillor, and then I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright.
Yeah, no, I think it's, you know, this project has, there's significant interest in what's going on with this project and what sort of tact council is taking on this. So I think it's important for the community to know the outcome of our discussions tonight and the comments that we will be making to the Airport Authority.
I'll turn to Mr. Humble before Mr. Wainwright, or Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, from a staff perspective, I see no reason why the comments and recommendations wouldn't be published on our website. Vis-a-vis, you know, it's through the minutes, and they could be made more explicit through a link, I guess, to that. I question though the necessity to publish them within the news review. I'm not sure. We've never done that before, and quite frankly, I'm not sure how that would be taken by the community and quite frankly by the airport if the town were to undertake that. So it's my own perspective that I'm just providing to council.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Humble. Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, I was a little bit uncertain about the comments and recommendations as opposed to recommendations, because we're going to we're making some motions that are in fact recommendations to the airport authority, and everything else is comments. And there've been a lot of verbal comments, and I have no expectation well, I guess we've got to video the whole thing, and we're going to publish that video. If that's what you mean by publishing comments, great. But if you're talking about a transcript of all the comments that have been made going in the news review, well, I think we should maybe just stop at recommendations. And in terms of getting them in the news review, to ensure that they get in there accurately, we'd actually have to buy an ad, because we put out media releases, and they may or may not carry them, and they may or may not print exactly what we say. So I guess I'm looking, well, I'd like to see comments removed, and I'm a little hesitant about the news review and buying an ad.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul, then to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just concur with Councillor Wainwright's comment with respect to removing comments and I believe it should read that we publish these recommendations on our website and in the Peninsula News Review. And two comments on publishing this in the Peninsula News Review. One option, as Councillor Wainwright alluded to, is a press release, a note to the media that these are the recommendations that we've made to the Victoria Airport Authority. But I'll certainly look for the mover to comment. I think the intent here is just to be proactive and ensure that council is using whatever mechanisms it has at its disposal to notify the community of the series of recommendations that we put forward to the airport authority tonight. And in part, it's in my mind helping keep them accountable to see this in the media. The town advertises in the Peninsula News Review on a very regular basis. I don't see this as being particularly out of character if we feel it's important enough that our recommendations, as we have authored them tonight, are displayed in the media. Then yeah, we have to buy an ad. Those are just my thoughts. I'll certainly yield to further comments from council and perhaps the mover, if she may, Mr. Mayor, just reiterate her intent around what publishing these in the news review looks like in her context.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Keefe.
Yes, thank you to my colleagues for clarifying the issue about comments. I agree with that. And getting to just building on Councillor Rintoul's point, the point of this is yes, being proactive in our communications with the community. This is the most significant development that we've seen in a number of years, that we may see. It has significant impacts on our community. And yes, we could say that, well, if community members are that interested, they could go and try and find, the minutes on our website. They can read through them. Most people don't have that attention span, based on what I see in social media. They see little clips of things. They don't get the full scoop. And we're dependent on how the media decides to report on our decisions. And so I think it's important with such a significant project like this, for us to take the lead and be proactive and let the community know this is what we've recommended to the airport authority. And if that means that we have to spend a little bit of money to place an ad so that our communications are clear and people get accurate information, I think that's a good investment.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. If I could make comment in that I'd like to break this out into two considerations. The first is that we publish these recommendations on our website. We were proactive, and following our last council meeting, there was a direct link from the main homepage, the main page of our website, to the VA referral and associated documents, making it easier for the public not to have to go into the council portal and refer to specific agendas and minutes and that sort of thing. We know that there are members of the public who will do that. They'll watch the video, they will look at the minutes and the agenda. And I think, I'm not sure what it means published to the website, given that we have already, through this project, published them through a direct referral, what it means to publish them on our website in a motion. So I'd ask clarification for that, and then I'd like to address the second part of the motion.
So in terms of publish these recommendations on our website, so to me that would mean having something on our front page, perhaps where it's the VAA recommendations, just as we have right now for the referral.
So as I say, we have done that to date, and I see no reason why we wouldn't do this and why we have to motion to it.
Okay, well, that's good, because when we had discussions about providing information on the VAA referral, initially, there was some resistance about providing that information. So I just want to make it explicit that this is important information that council wants to convey to the community, and it should be prominent and easily available on our website. And in terms of the Peninsula News Review, I think it needs to be there because not everybody is going to our town website all the time to see what's new. And the majority of people, at least they're looking at the Peninsula News Review, whether it's in print form or online. So it's another tool at our disposal to get the word out. And I think it's worth that investment.
Okay, so I'm going to request and split the motion, and I'm going to split it into the first part with regards to publish prominently on our website. And is there any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? Opposed? And none opposed, the motion carries. And with regards to the second part, with regards to publishing in the Peninsula News Review, we did see clarification. We can issue a press release. Again, issuing a press release is not publishing it in the. We are subject to the whims of the media. We do know that after our initial meeting on April 26th, that this was front page on the Times Colonist and front page on the Peninsula News Review. It was front page on the Times Colonist on the Tuesday, and front page on the Peninsula News Review on Thursday. And I think, given the public interest, there will be reporting of it, and we certainly are considering issuing a press release. We also have the option to issue press release through news media's social media, which can provide the exact wording of our recommendations to those social media sites, and that is something we're considering doing as well. In terms of publishing it, and I think that is distinguished by us purchasing a display, what is commonly referred to as a display ad, to present our motions. The Peninsula News Review next publishes on Thursday. I believe we may have missed the date for that issue, so we may very well not be publishing these if we chose a display ad until a week Thursday. And quite frankly, what we've seen to date in terms of the media and public engagement with us, that it will be much more immediate than when the timing might be of coming out in the review. But I will leave that to as a separate motion on the floor for further council comment. Councillor Rintoul?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I like the suggestion of having this in our precise language that we've worked, through tonight in the Peninsula News Review. And if that meant purchasing an ad, I was happy to see us do that. The town buys ads all the time. Around public notice and et cetera. So I guess my question would be through to staff, because I think it's an important point. If we've missed this Thursday's deadline, in my mind, we've lost the opportunity to get this out on a timely basis, and that would be a concern. So through to staff, if you're familiar with the deadline for submission of advertising for the news review.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Through the mayor to Councillor Wintoul, would have to look into it. I don't have the deadlines available to me right now.
So it could be subject to availability of this Thursday, because quite frankly, I think a week Thursday is, Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. I was going to say, yes, it would be nice if it was this Thursday, but I'm still okay if it's a week next Thursday, because what happens is, if we leave the media to report the bits and pieces that they've heard from our meeting or that they get from our minutes, we're at the mercy of what they want to report. And yes, it might, even if it is a week later, at least it's out there, so people who may have not received all of the information or have misunderstandings about what council did or didn't do, I think it's important for us to put it out there. And if that means it's next Thursday, I'm fine with that.
Thank you, Councillor, for motivating. Could you, the motion's been amended a little bit, could you just read it if you can see it as amended?
Is that your final one there, Councillor Wainwright?
Yes, it would be that.
So because this project is of significant interest to the community, that we issue a press release and place an advertisement in the Peninsula News Review with these recommendations.
And a seconder?
Second.
A second. I'll turn to Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just for clarity as well, just given the scope of the recommendations and ad costs, etc. Does council have any direction in terms of what size ad they would like? I mean, are we talking a quarter page, half page ad, etc.? Again, given the scope on here, if we go much smaller than a quarter page, we're looking, it's going to be challenging to even be able to read it given the size. So it's, yeah, sorry for the clarification, but it's
no,
important.
that's reasonable. I would recommend some leeway, a quarter to a half page. So, I mean, we can incorporate that in the motion, or is that helpful just okay. Councillor Wintoul?
Yeah, no, I understand the need for some clarity on that. In my mind, a quarter page would suffice for this. And I think if staff find that it's at risk of being illegible because of the font size, that they could reasonably address it.
Okay. Moved and seconded. Further discussion. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. And I feel we probably would have issued a media release anyway, so I don't know we need a recommendation for that. I'm not really sold on an advertisement in the Peninsula News Review, especially given we already knew we were going to be putting it on our website and we'd have that press release. And as the mayor has said before, it's likely we could put it up on social media in our own words as well. And I know the rationale is that not everybody looks at those things, but the idea is if this is of such importance to the community and people were very interested, then presumably those people would be the ones who'd go check the website and they would look for the media release, and they would, if they still couldn't find it, we can give them the report that will be coming out. We can give them that link directly. And if there's somebody who isn't going to bother to check the website or wait for the media release, then they're probably somebody who doesn't care much in the first place, and they're not going to look for the ad. And I'm not sure how much effort to put into the idea that we need to reach people who, or especially to try and get in front of misperceptions or kind of deliberate misunderstandings that kind of would come about from bad faith in the community and not from people who are genuinely interested in the project and how it was going to affect them, especially since it's not our project. It's the VA's project, and these are merely our recommendations on it. And I'm worried about us trying to take a role about managing the appearances of a project that isn't ours and our role in it. And that we're going to end up having to do that with a lot of projects, because we've had a lot of contentious projects that were actually our projects, that were actually Town of Sydney, like on Town of Sydney lands, where Town of Sydney was the decision maker. And we didn't go through this to try and appease or to try and get in front of misunderstandings that might have happened in, the Tallista neighborhood or in the downtown neighborhoods before. So I'm not really in favor of going that extra step.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Keefe?
Yeah, sorry, just final comment on this. I guess it's in the big picture, what do we see as our role in terms of communicating with our citizens about things that are important to them? We can certainly take the attitude or the view that, if people want to know, they can do the legwork and figure it out themselves. And if they're interested, they can go and figure out how to get the information. But what I worry about is, before I was on council, I was a single mom with 2 kids and working, and I had no clue what was going on. And people are busy. People are with kids and working. And so they're not necessarily going to go to the website or seek out information, but they do want to know about this stuff. And I would rather that they get clear information from us rather than, we could issue just a press release, but then the press has the option to take out the little bits and things that they want to tell people. So I think it's important for us to be more proactive with our communications overall. And even whether it's our project or not, I think we have a moral obligation to let our citizens know about this stuff. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Further discussion? Seeing none. Councillor Duncan, sir?
I would just counter that. I guarantee you the single moms with children are not reading the Peninsula News Review. All of their impression from, if they even know about this at all, is going to be from what they read on Facebook and from something like that. So I'm still questioning that the idea of the strategy for our communication, and that to say if we didn't do this, it was because we didn't care about communication is not the direction of be going here. It's just the very idea that an advertisement in the Peninsula News Review will help in any way reach people who are not already willing to be informed about what's going on or have the time to be informed. So I don't want to give the impression that it's not because I think single moms don't deserve to be informed. It's simply that this will not help reach people who are not already deliberately seeking out this information.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright, then to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have to agree with Councillor Duncan. We've got a lot of media interest in this story, and I'm fully expecting that the media is going to be reaching out to the mayor and to staff tomorrow morning to find out what happened. And it's going to be reported in the mainstream media, and it's going to be all over social media. And, the town's going to publish on the website what happened, because we've already made that motion. And there's going to be stuff that the town posts on its Facebook and social media, and various councillors will as well. And by the time the PNR comes out on Thursday, this is old news. Like it's most people will already have heard a distorted version, and seeing an ad in the PNR is likely not going to change their view of those, whatever distorted information they got. Because this is the kind of controversial development where people will listen to what resonates best with them, not with facts. But I think the key thing is, even if we manage to get it into Thursday's PNR, it's really a bit too late. So I think the media release and getting it out via our social media channels are the meaningful way for us to get our message out.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And though I appreciate the previous councillor's comments, I think it's also important to realize that not everybody's part of social media. Not everybody uses Facebook. Not everybody goes on the town's website. There are a significant portion of our population, elderly, who read the Peninsula Leaders Review to get local news. So there is some value in doing this for that particular part of the population, and they're likely to care a lot. So on that grounds alone, I would be willing to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? 3 opposed, Councillor Wainwright, Councillor Duncan, and myself. The motion carries. Thank you. Does that complete Councillor Keefe?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Garnett.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. Is it possible at this point, if it's amenable to the rest of us, to have a 5-minute break?
I will call a 5-minute recess and ask colleagues to stay online. Thank you. Okay, I'll look to reconvene our meeting, and I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright. We did have two other motions separate from the long motion that we moved.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'll just put that up on screen. What I've done as well, there were two motions that from Councillor O'Keefe that were passed. I've taken those and I've pasted them into this same document. So they're in here now as number 3 and number 4. So moving on to the last two, I would move that the town and VAA review the current MOU.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Councillor Wainwright?
This one is pretty straightforward. And mentioned earlier, the MOU really did not contemplate developments of this scale, and we would benefit by reviewing the MOU and incorporating lessons learned.
Thank you, Councillor. Further discussion? Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, staff certainly agree that the MOU is something that needs to be reviewed. It was established in 2000, so it's a fairly old document. Having said that, it will take a significant amount of time and planning effort to review the MOU. It's a fairly significant planning document. It'll have to be done, obviously, in consultation with the VAA. So it's likely not something that we could add as a 2021 project without potentially removing something else and looking at our current work plan. So I just wanted to speak to the potential timing associated with that review process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. Sorry, did I see Councillor Wainwright and then Councillor O'Keefe?
Just a clarification. I was not looking at this as being a priority or replacing another activity in our plan. Hopefully, we're not going to see another development of this magnitude in the next year or so.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Keefe?
No, I'm okay, thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Councillor Wainwright?
Okay. And the final motion that the town send a copy of the recommendations regarding this referral to MP Elizabeth May, MLA Adam Olson, Minister of Transport Omar Al Gabra, and BC Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Rob Fleming.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Wainwright, for doing that for Council and the public this evening. We do have correspondence for information.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, I beg your pardon, I'd like to move a motion arising.
Councillor O'Toole, please proceed.
Yeah, thank you. As a motion arising, I would like to move that the mayor request a meeting with the two Town of Sydney nominees to the Victoria Airport Authority Board of Directors in order to discuss in detail Council's recommendations pertaining to the York Realty Development Referral.
Second.
And Councillor O'Toole, I just want to confirm, Ms. Nelson, you have that motion as read. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just think in keeping with one of the previous motions we passed with respect to reviewing the MOU, there's also an opportunity.
And thank you, Councillor Wainwright. So we do have it before us. Thank you, Councillor O'Toole. Any further discussion? I'll call a question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Any other motions from Council on the VA referral? Thank you very much. We will now continue with correspondence for information. We do have several items. If we could have a motion to receive for information, please.
I'll move receipt of correspondence for information.
Second.
All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And we have no notice of motion and no motion to go on camera this evening. I would look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
And seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Thank you, council. Have a good evening. Thank you to members of the public who watched this evening.